Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your favorite fourth tier podcast with third tier haircuts and first tier optimism for Bitcoin and the good that it'll do for the world. I'm joined today by my stalwart co-host, Grant Riker, and we're here to talk about Nick Land, who is one of Grant's biggest influences as a philosopher, or at least one of the people that he has a lot of respect for.
I was thinking he's like, as a public philosopher, I would say he's the most influential. If we kind of like categorize between people who are buried in the university
Yes.
and we don't see them, and then public philosophers who are kind of like intellectuals doing their thing in public, Nick Land is par excellence of that category. And I think one of like maybe the philosopher of the 21st century as far as a public intellectual who's also a philosopher.
Yeah, and he's also better than a lot of people that are just actually buried.
Yeah.
It's nice to have someone that is communicating openly online. You can follow him at Xenosystems on Twitter and X, whatever you want to call it, and you could see that he's engaging constantly, which is really cool to see because you don't get that out of you know the dead ones.
Yeah, he
Um,
does. He communicates in a demotic language, a language of us normal people, as in some
yes.
Twitters. He uses kind of Twitter talk and X talk. So you're getting what a philosopher sounds like when the philosopher has had a couple of stiff drinks, maybe, and it's great stuff.
Sign of the times. Sign of the time. We previously covered his book Xenosystems, which
Yeah.
is a collection of writings from his blog, put together into book form, and truly opened my eyes to what, in retrospect, appears to be a fairly obvious idea. And that idea is that we're approaching this time where there's a confluence of three forces that is going to come together to exclude humans from economic activity. And that would be the combination of digital intelligence, artificial intelligence, and digital capital, which is Bitcoin, and robotics. And when you put those three together, then you have a closed loop system where capital is being optimized for capital's own sake without people in the middle of it. It begs the question, what will happen at that point? We should become much more efficient. But efficient at what, right?
Yeah.
Are we still going to be making tennis shoes and waffle irons, or are we going to be making other things? We don't know because we won't be in the loop. But somebody's going to do it. Somebody's going to get super intelligence in a robot and say, go make money. And it's going to be interesting to see what they come back with. And so,
And what capital itself will come back with once it is itself autonomous. It has its own will to power, its own agentic capacity that is non-human and centered on increasing its own capacity. So you queued that up nicely because he definitely goes into that, and we're going to talk about today too.
yeah, autonomous capital, Grant's worst Halloween costume so far.
Yeah, imagine trying to dress up as autonomous capital, and then imagine doing that when you're 41 years old, and imagine what that looks like.
It's better than a cowboy or a ghost.
I guess
So,
so.
um, anyways, yeah, so we're going to talk about another one of Nick Land's writing. This is an earlier writing prior to Xenosystem, but this one is dedicated like exclusively to Bitcoin.
So I would say, I don't know
or-
that this is 2018. We're going to talk about today. Xenosystems is a collection of blog entries that kind of spans a bunch of time. So honestly, some could be before, some could be after, some could be during the specific
This is
writing
true.
we're going to talk about today. Yeah.
Yeah. This is more of a one-off
Right.
directed at Bitcoin.
Yeah. This is
The
the book
title,
on Bitcoin. This is Nick Land's concerted effort to put something on paper, on digital space about Bitcoin. This is the book right here.
yeah, the title is Cryptocurrent, Bitcoin and Philosophy. This was written by Nick Land. This was published version 1, October 31st, Halloween of 2018. This is version 1. This is a draft. From what we can tell, it's probably unlikely that he ever comes back to finish it. However, Nick Land's first pass at things is better than most people's last pass. So
Yes.
I think we're going to get a lot out of this. And as usual, Grant's going to lead the discussion. I'm going to toe in with some homespun dumb questions and see if we
Hopefully,
can't
we're
all
gonna,
make some
yeah,
sense out of this.
try to make this intelligible as a co-enterprise here. So this is an unfinished manuscript. As I mentioned, this is Nick Land. This is incredible. You know, as I said, I think one of the greatest public intellectuals of the 21st century. It's a lot to say, but I think that's true. Um, and this is his work on Bitcoin. So a concerted philosophical effort to understand Bitcoin from a very important public intellectual. And it's just not talked about in the Bitcoin space. So what we're going to do today, I hope, is get some of these ideas out. I don't purport to be an expert on Nick Land or the vast array of material he brings together to talk about Bitcoin, but we're going to do our best. And we're going to, I think at the worst, at least, we're going to lay a bunch of interesting ideas on the table so that you can find something useful and interesting and different as you think about Bitcoin. The same ideas float around the space. They're good ideas, bad ideas. Here are going to be some new ideas. And so I hope this seeds into the community just some fresh thinking. So we'll start off with the foreword in chapter 1, and we'll just kind of work our way through it and again, get out a bunch of interesting ideas. So as Lucas mentioned, it's called cryptocurrent. And so kind of Land takes as a starting point, jumps off from these two words, crypto and current, currency, movement. So here's a quote: economies are assembled from flows. Unsurprisingly, therefore, their native codes are currencies or current signs. As societies mobilize matter energy resource streams, their monetary conventions register these flows by inversion and strict reciprocity. Goods flow in one direction, the money flows in the opposite direction. These complex flows are what the economy is. This is one part of cryptocurrent. So it's about flows, as we'll see, of currency, time, and secrecy. It's also going to be, when we throw the cryptography in, about the nature of one-way flows, downhill streams, entropic, how people can tap into this engineering perspective of cryptography, of asymmetric cryptography, to create interesting and new types of economic systems, techonomic systems. So because that's what economies are: flows, directional flows, currencies in one direction, materials in the other. There is also a homogeneity to this idea of flow. In flow, money becomes numbers or price, and the material things also become that price. So everything is homogenized into number and quantity. And this reduction to number and price is, as we'll see, going to be something pre-theoretical that happens without us knowing. Prices are generated spontaneously from the ground up through the production of the economy, through the operation of, as we'll see, things like Bitcoin as they become forms of machine intelligence. So I want to throw that on the table to give like cryptocurrent. We're talking about why he used that title in a very broad overview. I want to say something about the pros before we get into it. So I hope you do, dear reader, dear viewer, Google cryptocurrent Nick Land. This is all on the internet. You can read this manuscript, but note that Nick Land writes in a very specific register as a philosopher, and also as a philosopher in a specific tradition, a type of prose that, if you've ever tried to read someone like Deleuze and Guattari, certain philosophers of the 21st and 20th century that have a very energetic but dense prose, this is like that. So it's worth reading, but even Land acknowledges there's like certain cognitive irritation to the way that he writes. But he says this is going to be tied to the other part of cryptocurrent. Current is about the flows that comprise the economy, money and materials. Cryptography, but also crypto literally means hidden. So this is tied to the nature of philosophy. Nature loves to hide. That's a quote from a pre-Socratic philosopher, Heraclitus. And so part of Land's prose is hiding in plain sight some of the ideas that he's talking about. You have to read through it. You have to do the work to understand and decrypt it. So secrecy, Land points out, has always played a role in philosophy since its inception. The history of philosophy with the ancient Greeks kind of arose in the public square, but it departed from a tradition before that of Hermeticism, of ancient mysteries, of, as we talked about when we talked about Heidegger on the question concerning technology, where the truth was defined as aletheia or aletheia, unconcealedness, remembering, something emerging. And so modern truth is in the public square, objectively known to all, available to all. Kind of that pre-modern truth was decrypted through ancient mysteries that only the elect can understand. So there's always been a subterranean current of secrecy, even within the tradition of philosophy, and you encounter it in the way that certain philosophers like Heidegger and Land even, they write in a way that you have to work to understand. So how is Bitcoin, how is that secret or hidden, right? Isn't that, there's public transactions, open source code, but of course part of that we know is the access to accounts is through secret knowledge in the nature, a sort of public secrecy, and Land dials in on this later, in the nature of a mask. A mask is a public secret. It is a thing that is visible to others but conceals what lies underneath. And that's kind of how Bitcoin operates, by hiding in plain sight. The internet often does this through digital avatars, through restricted access to accounts. It's both open and closed at the same time. Commercially open 24/7, politically closed, not open to modification by political whim. So that's, I'll stop there because that kind of gets out on the table the most general idea of cryptocurrent and some of the most general ideas. Does that all making sense? Lucas is kind of laying the groundwork for what's to come.
Yeah, true Nicholas fashion. There's a lot in a little.
Yeah.
He's the most dense writer that I've ever read. And so, cryptocurrent, what we're doing is we're talking about the economy as affected by Bitcoin, as affected by cryptography. The economy is a mass sum of everything. It's everything we do, but it is a mass sum. It is reduced to numbers. And in one way, you have human productivity, and on the other way, you have human energy. And they're being exchanged. Energy in the form of money, and productivity in the form of goods and services. And we can reduce that down to what we understand as an economy. And therefore, and by the way, I do like I do appreciate, I guess, philosophy as something that is hidden. Um, you don't get good ideas with other people. You get good ideas in silence, and you get good ideas. You make progress in the way that you view the world through individual experience. And that individual experience primarily is something that has to happen in concert with yourself, and typically nothing else, maybe nature. So that's where the big ideas from philosophy came from. These guys pre-internet, pre-iPad, pre-doom scrolling, um, strolling around Jerusalem cruisers, maybe a robe, um, probably, probably no Uber Eats, going through the paces of life and experiencing things that when we read them 2,222 years later, we realize that someone has found an experience in the world that is obvious, but was being missed by most people. And in order to have that, perspective, uh, you kind of have to be alone. So yeah, it comes out of secret, and is exposed when it's given to the public.
Yeah, yeah, philosophy has that notion of hiding in plain sight, and it is obscured by too much publicity because then people seize on it. As we see on Twitter, if you say something that's remotely intelligent, it gets mocked or people misinterpret it or you get canceled or something like that. So a lot of the conversation has to take place amongst a cohort of like-minded people, or at best or worst, maybe, as you point out, within oneself to decrypt a lot of this stuff. Bitcoin, this is going to be one of the things too. So that Land talks about, Bitcoin is part of a golden age of masks, about this hiding in plain sight, about this being public while being private. That is an extension again of the idea of the digital avatar, the profile which is an anime pic, and then you're some fat slob in a basement, right? There's a distinction between the two. So Bitcoin also interrogates this idea of identity. Bitcoin is where money and identity fuse in a digital environment to certify something as it is. Land says, and he'll develop this later, is inherently a monetary phenomena. To credential information online is inherently a monetary phenomenon because it makes it scarce, rivalrous, meaning it can't be in two places at the same time, and exclusive, meaning one person has exclusive possession of it. Being a particular thing online makes it into a token or a coin. And I think this is an interesting kind of suggestion that Land puts out there, that coin, we have, Dogecoin, meme coins, Bitcoin. Bitcoin started this, but the suffix coin moves between money and identity. And I think that's an interesting naming convention, that things that end in coin on the internet, we might say, have fused money and identity by making a particular thing exclusive, scarce, and rivalrous. Only one person has it. Whereas most things online can be copied and pasted. A thing with the suffix coin cannot just be copied and pasted. Somehow its ownership has been marked. So I just like that naming convention. Um, Land, in his philosophical analysis, we're going to talk in detail about the tradition that he employs, the type of philosophical analysis he uses. In a little bit, he specifically dials in on Immanuel Kant in a form of philosophical critique, and we're going to go into that in detail. At the beginning, he also kind of he breaks down a Satoshi email line by line as a sort of fragment. A lot of the philosophy that came down to us before Socrates were these fragments, and he reflects on a lot of Satoshi's writings in the same way, as if, Satoshi was a dense writer. He was a clear writer, but Satoshi was also a dense writer. In a phrase like new electronic cash system, just take that, one of the phrases that Land looks at. If Bitcoin is, quote, a new electronic cash system, every one of those words in there can be unpacked. And Land does that, and he comes out with what we have here is a techno-commercial synthesis, where you have uh, electronic technology, and then cash, commercial. So you have a techno-commercial system. You have a machine that includes its own incentivized operation. And so I point this out. I'm not going to go through all of Land's analysis, but at the beginning, just to kind of show how he treats the material, he takes very seriously the writings of Satoshi as a serious thinker and writer, and not just as a technologist. Is that any thoughts there? Or?
I'm I'm just thinking in my mind about the incentive structure. There's something that I became aware of yesterday that I'd never considered. I was listening to, I think it was Lynn Alden, but I'm not sure. I was listening to someone talk about the mechanics of how the Bitcoin selling side works. And so Bitcoin is a commodity. Commodities are something I'm familiar with because I grew up on a farm. So corn, wheat, cattle. A commodity means that you're a price taker. You have a homogeneous product. So my corn is the same as your corn, and I get the price at the market the same that you get. We don't get to choose the price. We have to take the price. Bitcoin, you are a price taker. However, the saying about commodities has always been that the cure for high prices is high prices. So if corn goes from $3 a bushel to $7 a bushel, more people will raise corn because there's an economic incentive to do so. And therefore, the supply will increase, it will outpace demand, and the price will come back down. That's true for all commodity markets except Bitcoin. And the interesting thing about Bitcoin is that the producers of Bitcoin, the miners, When the price gets low, they are incentivized to sell because they have to cover their costs.
Yeah, and we saw this very recently with minor capitulation, right? Miners
Yeah.
selling at the
They
bottom.
have to give in,
Yeah,
they have to pay their costs. When the price
yeah,
gets high, they're incentivized to hold on to it. And so we have something that's different in the commodity market now. High prices are not a cure for high prices in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, high prices incentivize higher prices because the higher the price, the less Bitcoin will be available to sell because they won't need to sell as much. And why would you sell it for anything else? So it's yet another paradox, I guess, of Bitcoin where it's breaking our conventional understanding of what a market is
yeah,
due to this nature of absolute scarcity. Because when prices go up with Bitcoin, you can't produce more. There's still
yeah.
going to be X number released every 10 minutes, and that's it.
So let's
Um,
focus on this part of that. So it Bitcoin changes our conception of what a market is because it introduces absolute scarcity. And Land's point here too is it changes the way that the market is, the nature of the market's functioning because it induces or converts it into a techno commercial system. And I mean, we already have a commercial system that is very technical, but we don't have one that is techno commercial in the sense of having the potential for autonomous operation by the technology itself. It's still at many points gate kept by third parties that have to authorize the continued operation of the system, gatekeepers to flows, and just like people who can open and close markets, right?
yeah.
But with Bitcoin, we get a techonomic system, a machine that includes its own incentives. And so a flywheel in a sense, but like a self-driving car, a fully autonomous capital, right? That's the phrase. Capital when it begins to operate itself, not because it doesn't need humans, but because humans are kind of lured into it by the incentives that technology embeds. And then, as sort of a game theoretic playing out, people simply operate the system and the system becomes autonomous because we're going to operate it a certain way. People are going to act in a certain way. And so, Bitcoin as autonomous capital, um, well, that's well, the second point I had to that was just that it has political effects, even if it's apolitical in a sense, because capital is the enemy of political stasis. Capital constantly abandons its former iterations. The left will defend the current form of capital, like through rent controls and kind of taxation harvesting and stuff. And the
And
right
regulation.
and regulation, absolutely, to keep the incumbents in power, keep out new people from getting in. And the right does that as well. This is the same thing. The right will defend social forms that are bolstered by current forms of capital, kind of the current hierarchy of the system. So both left and right are challenged by Bitcoin as autonomous capital because capital is itself the enemy of a sort of stasis that both left and right in their own particular ways want to protect. So that's what I just wanted to, you were talking about autonomous or the nature of Bitcoin, what it does, the economic system, and just to dial in on Land's point of a techonomic system and its nature of Bitcoin as autonomous capital.
Do we even think about left and right when we're viewing things through Nick Land's eyes? Because one of the things that we took away from Zeno systems was that all forms of political organization, be it democracy, socialism, capitalism, a president, a dictator, a king, and a queen, all of these are merely dots on a spectrum that is a population agreeing to apply a moral break as in not breaking up, but a break as in the brakes on your car, a moral break to economic activity, where we're saying that we are going to optimize and be efficient and be productive up until the point that it violates our moral sensibility that we've all agreed upon, which our moral sensibility is simply that it's less about what we agree upon and more about what we agree to forget, more about what we agree to leave behind, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, but so I guess my question is, do we even think about left and right, or do we just think about points on a spectrum?
Yeah, I think no, I think you're right. I mean, left and right have always been kind of ridiculous phrases. I think it comes from the French Revolution, like they had the left and right of some sort of political establishment or whatever. But no, I think you're right with land specifically. As you know, the left and right, in a certain sense, is a sort of moralized vocabulary that is about putting brakes on technological process, which is what land is really in favor of. He just wants to let AI go. He wants intelligence to bootstrap itself. The key, like the telos, the goal of intelligence is more intelligence. And that seems to be Land's, like, what he prescribes. To the extent that he has a morality, it is let intelligence do what it does. And so he seems to, especially on Twitter, get really testy by political interventions that are in some way slowing down the advance of technology and kind of hindering its progress towards super intelligence or lower towards increasing its own capacity, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. This is
Yeah.
why I do want to point this out because this was one of the things that was incredibly illuminating about Xenosystems is understanding that all these different types of political organization, capitalism, communism, socialism, whatever, all we're doing is we are agreeing this is where we draw the line due to something moral that we've agreed upon. And by the way, moral is also immoral to other people. Like our morality is immoral to someone who has a different morality and vice versa. And so um, these political organizations are a battle between people trying to, I guess, express and gain adoption for their own chosen or maybe not chosen in the sense that it's free will, but chosen in the sense that this is what you get to deal with, and therefore kind of like choosing the dollar. Like we didn't choose the dollar; it was what we were born into, and because we were born into it, it became our natural environment, much like the fish swimming in water, right? How's the water? What is water?
Right.
Know how do you know the thing that you're born into
Hmm.
because it simply becomes who you are. um, and so land gives us a perspective on political organization as morality, in a way that I think really parallels to the revelation that people go through when they start to understand Bitcoin, which is that you can't understand Bitcoin without understanding the dollar, or current other monetary systems. And you can't do that until you realize that it is something that you're living in. It's not just this ethereal thing that you don't pay attention to. The most common answer when somebody asks, like, what is money, is like, it's the dollar. Well, what is the dollar? It's money. And there's this circular reasoning that's applied there that um, people do break out of. That's the path that every Bitcoiner goes through, which is you learn about this thing that might make you money, and then you realize that it might be very handy. It might be so handy that the government will try to ban it, and then you realize that the government can't ban it, and then you realize, well, why would the government even want to ban something? Like you have to go back to that initial question of, if this thing is good, why would we want to restrict people from using it? And that's when you learn about the dollar, and that's when you learn about the moral brakes that it places upon not just society, but upon individual growth and an individual's ability to, um, I guess, live a life of expression through the economic activity that they've generated. Because if you live in a system where that's constantly being stolen from you through inflation and debasement, then you never truly reach, you never get an opportunity to express who you are. You're constantly having to reinvent yourself in this system in order to try to stay ahead or stay afloat. Um, which is why I believe that up until I think Elon Musk was probably one of the first people that, or he's not the first, but he's like a very shining example of someone who has no intention of exiting. Like, it's always been this badge of honor within the tech community. How many exits have you had? Which basically means, how many times have you come up with an idea, developed it to a point that you could sell it for more than it was worth, and then taken that money and sold out? Um, and then you see this modern day autonomous capital android human robot that is Elon Musk running 6 companies that he has no intention of selling.
Yeah.
Uh, and would, would genuinely never entertain the idea of selling, because why would you need to do that if you live in a system that is that flywheel that allows you to create that economic activity that allows you to continue to express yourself, as opposed to, um, the dream of someone who wants to be a teacher, who wants to be an artist, who then becomes a insurance agent, or a uh, OnlyFans star, star. I don't know what you call it, but um, because they just can't express the thing that they truly wanted to be. So
Yeah. Now, why would you take the chips off the table if you're making the table into the new techonomic system? You're keeping the chips, everything that is being made by you, like Elon, SpaceX, the Boring Company, all these things are operational parts of a new economy. Why take that off the table when the table that you're building is what's going to supplant, the economy itself? But no, you put a lot of interesting threads out there. I think Nick Land is going to, and as we proceed through this, tie all those together, or at least make interesting comments on each of those things. As far as Bitcoin as politics, you're right that Land is a very interesting perspective. We're going to get a bit more to that, but now we're kind of going to move into chapter 2, cryptocurrency as critique. And so instead of Bitcoin as politics, now we're going to talk about what the book is nominally about, Bitcoin as philosophy. So philosophy generally, Land says, tries to lay claim over an area, to claim sovereignty. Like when you say there's a mathematician and somebody who does the philosophy of math, right? And the person who does the philosophy of math claims sovereignty over all of math and kind of says, I'm going to define the foundations. The person who does science, then somebody comes in and says, I'm going to do the philosophy of science, and they claim sovereignty over all of science and begin to talk about the foundations of it. So in this way, when we philosophize, there's kind of an irreducible claim to the whole area, a sovereignty over it. The philosophy simply has that pretension, one might say. Bitcoin, though, maybe is a bit different. Land says Bitcoin, it's not Bitcoin as philosophy, the philosophy of Bitcoin, though. It's Bitcoin is philosophy. There is a sovereignty there too of Bitcoin, maybe over philosophy, because Bitcoin is going to produce its own time. We're going to talk about that in more detail. We talked about it previously when we talked about Durgigi's Bitcoin is time. Land talks about that in depth too. Bitcoin knows things by doing them and brings them into being through its cognition, through its operation of them. So if imagine a sort of philosophy where you think the domain, you think about science, and you bring science into being. That's what Bitcoin does in a sense. Through its operation, it is philosophical in that it brings into being time. It brings into being these different things that constitute it. So it's a material philosophy, which is the future of philosophy. Land thinks, I think Land thinks, that philosophy is about becoming material in processes, moving away from human subjectivity into the objectivity of technology, or the new subjectivity of technology, maybe. Yeah, go
the
ahead.
well, it's the throw in just to throw in this quote that the greatest truth is the one from which all other truths can trace back their truthfulness,
That's
or
what
their
philosophy tries to do, right? To create that,
exactly
that,
right. Yeah,
yeah,
this
that's,
hierarchy of,
yeah,
like, there are truths that that depend upon other truths for their truthfulness.
yeah.
And Bitcoin at the top of it, this is where I would say Nick and Jack, who have been doing the work on Bitcoin as the architecture of time, this is what they're trying to one of the things that they're trying to talk about, which is that Bitcoin creates time. It creates its own time. Its block height is what we refer to it as, but um, it has a discrete individual block of time. And on one side of that equation is uncertainty and energy. And on the other side of that equation is certainty and heat. And this is the expression of entropy in Bitcoin mining, where you have a mempool of transactions that are waiting to be confirmed. And prior to being confirmed, they are uncertain. And we apply energy, electricity through the Bitcoin miner. And through that process, on the other side of it, we get the confirmed transactions, which is the certainty, and then heat, which comes out as the byproduct. Um, and so when we create this time, we create truth. And that truth is something that all the other truths help validate, because every time that you confirm a block, you are also confirming every other block that's ever been created. So, um, the first transaction on Bitcoin is reconfirmed every 12 minutes. The thousandth transaction, the millionth transaction, the billionth transaction. And these are things that become more true over time, because they're validated again and again and again and again and again. And so there is this wellspring of truthfulness that we can trace back all the way to an inception of
S
the genesis
so
block.
are when you say Nick and Jack, was that the 2 people who had that paper or that paper regarding some sort of, resistance they thought that Bitcoin had to quantum attack based on its creating its own notion of time?
That's how some people perceive it. It's not that they think it has resistance to quantum attack. It's that what they're saying is that quantum is reliant upon the idea of continuous
Okay,
time.
right, so they're
That there
saying
is no point,
they're
right? That there's
yeah,
You can't have a point in time, that time is a flow. This is grounded in Einstein's theory of relativity, which is that there are 4 dimensions. There's height,
yes.
width, depth, and then there's time. And we can measure height, width, and depth, but time is a flow. It's continuous. And that creates all these paradoxes that we can't justify. To me, the one that's the most relevant is what's called, I think it's called Zeno's paradox, which is basically that if time is continuous, then motion is impossible, because motion requires that you have a point in time and a position and another point in time and a position, and that you move from this point in
Yeah.
time to this time.
So
And so, basically what he's saying, and this has always been a known problem with the theory of relativity, which is that if time is continuous, then we have all these, we can't explain black holes, etc. However, if time is discrete, meaning that if time has a smallest unit, a Planck time, basically is what we refer to, then all of these paradoxes can be resolved. And yes, that is the basis upon quantum, which is superposition,
yeah,
right?
so
Superposition
they're
is
saying
that
that
two things exist in the same place at the same time.
they believe that
And
Bitcoin's notion
yeah,
of time disproves quantum theory, essentially.
yeah,
And
exactly. Well,
it's
and what they're trying to say is like, look, just let's consider the evidence. Quantum theory is theory. There is no quantum proof. There never has been.
yeah,
To our knowledge, nobody is getting even close to proving quantum. It is a theory, and Bitcoin is reality. We have Bitcoin reality, which is that we have discrete time. And so we have an example of a system that has discrete time. And previous to that, all time has been referred to as a human creation, right? That it's just a something that we came up with in order to have a point of reference,
Yeah.
um, but that time itself did not exist as continuous. So, yeah, and yes, there are implications to these ideas of quantum.
Yeah, so this is a good entry point to where we're gonna go now, which is what Kantian critique is, because I think Nick and Jack have a lot of similarity to what Land is saying, but they fall into a deep philosophical error, which is speculative metaphysics, in that they think that because Bitcoin creates time, that therefore is the nature of time, not that Bitcoin is synthesizing a technical notion which replicates its own internal time metric, but they seem to think that time itself is somehow being created by Bitcoin. That's a philosophical error in the tradition of Kantian critique. So, what is Kantian critique? This is what Land is going to employ to analyze Bitcoin. This is like the foundation of what cryptocurrent is about using Kantian critique to understand what Bitcoin is. It's a way of an analyzing thing we're going to talk about. And I think keeping Nick and Jack, how they talk about quantum presently in mind, is going to help us illustrate if Land is correct, then they're stumbling into philosophical error if Kantian critique is correct. And I think that'll help us unpack what Kantian critique is. So in Kantian critique, and we'll just call it critique, we try to distinguish the way we know the thing from the thing itself. So critique tries to find the principle that allows knowing a domain, and then the principle that allows the knowing of a domain, but is not one of the terms within the domain itself, but is somehow constitutive of it. The ultimate foundation of Kantian critical philosophy is that the object and the conditions that make the object possible are different things. So to unpack that some more, critique distinguishes between the thing that we see and kind of the built-in lens that makes the seeing of that thing possible, between reality and the conditions that make possible our experience of reality. Critique is about helping us escape a very common philosophical error. And this is what I think that Nick and Jack stumble into, confusing the condition that makes something possible as if it were its own entity standing outside of reality instead of like a constituent part of that reality. So there's two different things within critique. The conditions that make reality possible, that bring it into our perception, that's what Kantian critique seeks to analyze and identify. Again, the conditions that make reality possible, that bring it into our perception. And something else that Kantian critique says is philosophical error, which is that there's something outside of the system of reality that governs reality. That we could say the condition that makes reality possible, that's time as an ordering principle that allows experience of reality to occur. You couldn't remove time and still have our experience of reality, because our experience depends on the ordering that the principle of time brings to it. Whereas if you see time as outside the system, then you make it into a separate thing and speculate on what time is. And that leads to all these sorts of paradoxes like Zeno's paradox and things like that, where you try to think about time as if it's apart and separate from the system. So looking at time,
Yes.
or yeah, do you want to go ahead?
Well, yeah, I mean,
This is,
I
yeah.
guess when I hear you say that, basically my interpretation of what this Kantian critique means is that it sounds like don't let evidence get in the way of a good theory, basically.
It is that
Like,
evidence depends on theory in order to even be evidence of something. So there's an implied notion within any empirical observation that already depends upon certain preconditions in order to even be possible as experience. Our experience of the world depends upon causality, substance, certain notions that order and structure our experience. So we can't even extricate from the notion of evidence and a idea of theory that's structuring the evidence.
well, I guess this is where I actually see, I guess, so you spoke about ordering, like the idea of causality and ordering. That is what Nick and Jack are pointing to with Bitcoin, saying, look, this is an example, a concrete example, concrete evidence of causality and ordering.
Hmm.
On the flip side, you have quantum. And with quantum, there is no causality, right? There is no this, then.
Yeah.
It's both things at the same time. In quantum, um, you can theoretically go backwards in time. What Bitcoin tells us is that you can't go backwards in time.
You can't go
And
backwards in Bitcoin time, right?
but you can't,
Within the
right.
system
But
of
what I'm
Bitcoin.
saying is that this is evidence of a system that has time that you cannot go backwards in. On the other side is quantum, which has no evidence of any system and therefore leaves all possibilities open. There's no ordering,
Yeah.
there's no causality, right? And so
But the
I
artificial
guess,
notion of time constructed within the system of Bitcoin does not mean that that notion of time
how
governs
do
the
we know
entire
it's
system,
artificial?
because
How do we know it's
it's
artificial?
artificial in the sense that it it pertains through the functioning of the parts of Bitcoin and is inherent in the operation of things like the difficulty adjustment, and just like how all that works as the functioning of part. It's not a separate thing. That's the Kantian error to say time is a separate thing above the system. No, it's just like part of how the system is ordered. It's not like a separate thing you can pull out and
Right.
say this is time. It is just
So
like
if it's not a separate thing, then it's evidence of time within the system,
it's
is
evidence
what
of
I'm
how the
saying. It's
system.
evidence of discrete time within the system.
Right. It's evidence of how Bitcoin reproduces its own notion of time, which is not physical time in the universe at large, which has its own
How do
notion
we,
of
but if
time.
it's in the system,
Yeah.
and it's not, if it's in the system, so if it's not separate,
It's
we're
within
saying that
Bitcoin. Yeah.
it's not, it is within the system, then it's not separate time. It simply is time.
It's how Bitcoin defines time, which is time as absolute succession. Quantum defines time differently as time as dimension. So they're really talking about
But
two
it
different.
doesn't, quantum doesn't define anything. Quantum only
Right. In
theorizes.
order for quantum theory to work, it has like a variable or a constant, which is time or something like that, which is time understood as a dimension, whereas Bitcoin is time understood as absolute succession. We could even give them different words. Instead of saying time for Bitcoin, we could just call it ordering. And then for
Yeah.
quantum, we could call it dimension. And these are just two different things. Bitcoin ordering does not disprove quantum dimension. And so quantum is or is not completely apart from Bitcoin. Bitcoin's operation and reproduction of ordering has nothing to do with quantum mechanics at all, and
I don't, that
doesn't
you
touch
can't, how
that.
can you say that it has nothing to do with it if it's within the system?
It's because quantum doesn't touch the macro. Quantum doesn't touch macro. Like our bodies in space are not part of how quantum describes reality, which is on like the subatomic level, right? So quantum is about this entanglement occurs not on the macro, not on macro objects, which is like our bodies in space, which have this notion of causality, and things like Zeno's paradox arise in the macro space. Quantum functions on the a certain like micro or something like that. So it's just two different. We're blending a bunch of things together. Quantum's a very specific type of theory that's very, very, very extremely accurate within its domain, which is not the macro
But it's
domain.
not accurate at all because it's just a theory.
Well, I mean, like all science is theory, right? That's
There is no evidence of accuracy because there is no
well, there's
evidence.
evidence. There's experiments. Like the CERN particle collider, it works based on like predictions about how like it proves certain predictions that quantum theory also
Predictions,
predicts, right? And
right?
that's how theories work. I mean, this is science will never perfectly establish something as true. It's always an approach to the truth subject to revision. Sort of Karl Popper. You can disprove, but you can't prove. And so that it's a theory does not mean its epistemological status is nil, that it says nothing. It just means we can't prove it 100%. But let's move on and like this is really helpful to understand Kantian critique because these are errors we stumble into all the time. And before Immanuel Kant, people speculated wildly on the nature of God, the nature of free will, the nature of time. But Kant is saying they always fell into philosophical error because they were looking for something outside the system instead of considering that these things are simply necessary constituent ordering elements of the system as such, as we experience. there's one undeniable thing going back to Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am, or even more basically, there's no I, there's just thought. There at least is thought or experience. We at least have that one datum to depart from. Given that we have something that is experience, what can we build out from that to understand reality? Well, in order to have experience, it has to be ordered. All experience is always like causally ordered. That's the nature of human experience. So the nature of the subjective human point of view that we have gives us a notion that in order to have experience, we have to have causality. We have to have time. Time is not something outside the system, in the nature of like a quantum clock or some sort of ticking. It's simply our experience, the fact of our having experience, which we do have. Everybody can prove this by having an experience. That presupposes a notion of time. Bitcoin is going to, in its operation, create its own internal sense of time, which is different from ours. And this is important for land because it's about creating machine subjectivities, new point of views upon which the world can be quote unquote experienced, or experience quote unquote can be generated. Machine experience comes off as a paradox, right? Because we think we humans have a unique corner on the market of experience. But Bitcoin, we don't know what that means, that it's generating this absolute succession. So I have this a little bit more on quantum critique. I want to pause and get your thoughts on it. So Kantian critique, it's complicated, so I really want to dial in on this because this is a phenomenally important part of this book. And also, a cool thing about reading this is you'll come away not just learning about Bitcoin, but learning about a very important move in the history of modern philosophy initiated by Immanuel Kant, which is this idea of critique. So so if you look again at time as outside of reality, that's metaphysical speculation and bad. But if you look at time as just one of the conditions that makes our perception of reality possible, then we're not wildly speculating on some sort of metaphysical notion. These sort of acceptable conditions often seem hidden to us because they are the lens on the glasses that make seeing possible. Time is hidden because when you look at the world, you are looking through time. The intrinsic nature of time is not concealed within a box, it is the box, is how Land puts it. So the target of critique are the sorts of philosophical error, rather the target of critique is speculative metaphysics, which it seeks to eliminate, which are attempts to understand the conditions of objectivity as if they were themselves objects. For example, we go into error when we ask about the nature of space or the nature of time or the nature of causality, as if these things had a nature separate from simply being things required to order our experience, separate from simply being conditions of our experience. You shouldn't try to understand space as out there, or anything like that. But instead, space is simply a condition that makes it necessary to have the sort of spatial experience we have. Um, and so critique identifies a difference between condition and object, gets rid of the transcendent object above us, time and space, by keeping things within the system. I have some really good material examples of this I want to get, but based on that general abstract hand waving, do you have any comments or remarks? I know it's a mind F because that's what Kant was doing. He called it his Copernican revolution because he's really trying to reorient the way that we look at
Being
things.
frozen. I think, like I said, one of the big ideas from Nick and Jack that has me thinking about quantum is simply the idea of superposition, which does not align with Bitcoin. The idea that my coins can exist in two places at one time can't happen within that system.
What are coins, though? Coins,
It
I
is
mean,
it is true. It is true that there can always be something that does not exist yet that can change our perception of what does exist. But that is the thing that Joe Rogan gets caught doing a lot on his podcast, which is, well, what if there's aliens? And what if those aliens know 12-dimensional physics, and what if those aliens can do time travel and they can
Yeah.
walk through walls and stuff like that? It's like, yes, that thing, if it exists, would disprove this thing that we understand about our current reality. However, our current reality, we have to deal with what is that current reality. And in that current reality, um, we have Bitcoin, which is real, and we have quantum, which is theory. And so those things, the idea of like the main idea of quantum superposition doesn't align with Bitcoin.
Sure it does.
Absolute scarcity.
No,
No, it doesn't.
so yeah,
No,
because
it doesn't. Like
superposition.
my coin can't exist. My coins don't exist in two places at once.
2 points to that. Superposition is not about macro objects. So again, the quantum theory only functions in the quantum level. So Schrodinger's cat experiment
Exactly.
is kind of a little bit different in that
It's
it's got
bound.
it's
It's a
what's that?
system outside. Like it's like that's very true. It's like it only works in this very specific place.
Right, right, which is the quantum level. And so that's what quantum is focused on. It's not about macro objects. It's not about coins, which are not even objects. Again, they're what are they like Merkle trees of prior transactions? Like it's hard to think about the ontology, the existence of what a coin even is. But it's not in any way doesn't disprove superposition. Like there's superposition
That's
may or may
I
not be
I
true, but
disagree. Like
okay, well,
I
we'll
just
put a pin or an asterisk. I hope I can get you to come
yeah.
around, but maybe not. Maybe we're just so
I say it doesn't disprove superposition because superposition is not proven. It's a theory.
okay, just on that level. But again, don't lean too hard on that. Like
What you're
all
not you're
science is a
but you can't
theory.
disprove something that hasn't been proven.
You can never prove a theory. Like you've said this before too, right?
Right.
All
Yes,
science is about
you're correct.
hypothesis. So yeah. So
You can disprove a theory that has been shown
right,
to be not
you
incorrect.
you can disprove a theory, but you can't conclusively prove a theory, except unless yeah. But so the important part is to get out on the table what Kantian critique is. I think this is helpful to do that. And the quantum debate is very live for Bitcoin, so it's good to reflect on this. But I had some examples about how Kantian critique, to make it more real and how it applies to Bitcoin. So um, one of the roles that critique played as a form of philosophy within modern philosophy, one of its importances practically. So we've been kind of doing this like talk about very abstract things like time and causality, which is where Kant kind of lodged his critique. But another way that critique is done is about a critique of like society and the objects within it. So three examples. In the political analog, um, so critique is one might say there are like a political authority purports to be something above the system, and so critique is kind of employed with certain sorts, I think, of anarchic implications because it wants to find all ordering within the system and not say that leaders are above the system. Modern art also is following Kant in a sense in that it's exploring what the limits of art are. When we see all of these terrible modern or postmodern experiments, which is some dude throwing like feces on a wall, I mean that's like Kantian critique of art in a sense where they're trying to figure out what the limits of art are. Broadly speaking, social constructivism, we maybe all heard this phrase where somebody thinks they've won every argument by saying, hey, you're just a social construct. It's just like, oh, that's just a social construct. It's just the way the society looks at it.
Which,
Social
by the way, is how quantum speaks about time.
again, time is an empty phrase. Like it doesn't have any content other than how the physical theory of quantum defines it. We have a human notion of our experience of time, which is a different word or concept or idea, a different realm altogether than how quantum considers time as a like in its own equations. We shouldn't mix the two. I think our experience of time with quantum theory's notion of time as a dimension or whatever it does. Social constructivism adopts the insight that objects have conditions that make them possible and then kind of generalizes it into a political way of saying that those objects therefore are somehow degraded, especially if they pertain to like how humans construct them. and just all generally to say that Kantian critique is employed in a sort of destructive way to try to pick apart systems and remove the transcendent element that purports to be above it and purports to be outside of it and control it. It gets rid of trusted third parties in a sense to bring it back to Bitcoin, which is why Kantian critique is an important way of looking at it for Land. Um, Land says the Satoshi continues critique into electronic networks by emphasizing their peer-to-peer element, which gets rid of that third party above or outside the system and instead brings all of the elements into the system and orders it in that sense. So um I have the next part I have is like Bitcoin really dials in on Bitcoin, but does Kantian critique make sense at all? I mean, it's a really abstract way of looking at things. I think that kind of was our spiel on it.
Yeah, I guess. I'm not.
Let's
Yeah,
take yeah, let's take it into
I
Bitcoin.
what I'm my well, I what I want to say is that I understand how you're applying Kantian critique to what Nick and Jack are saying. What I don't understand is if it's being applied to what quantum is saying. And so that's my interpretation, I
Yeah,
guess.
this is not a Kantian critique of quantum. What I was offering was just to say that a Kant person offering a critique of people who are trying to disprove quantum theory by speculating on a notion of time that is somehow outside of it. And so they say time is this way, so quantum can't be that way, whereas quantum is simply its own mathematical theory making predictions, and you prove or disprove those predictions through specific scientific experiments like colliding particles or whatever they do at CERN, try to create demonic black holes. I don't know what they're doing there, honestly. Um, but let's bring it into the realm of Bitcoin away from quantum. Um, Bitcoin is a credibility machine. So it realizes a definition of truth with no superior tribunals outside of the protocol, right? Bitcoin, and you were describing this earlier, it produces truth. It makes its own notion of truth within it through the operation of its elements. Um, and so that's a critical through critique a good way to look at Bitcoin. There is no notion of truth outside of it abstractly as a metaphysical presupposition. It's simply like the operation of Bitcoin itself brings in a notion or creates or requires a notion of truth, which it then embodies through its the operation of its elements. Um,
Okay, say that one more time.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that. I think why my way through that with a bit more, but I'm gonna get back to that. So we can another way to put this, I think that's gonna make it even more simple is the notion of critique is we can only think of the world as it relates to us because we construct the world in the process of relating to it. We have world constituting intelligences, so we can't think outside of that. Um, we can understand the limits of our thought, but we can't transcend those limits by understanding them. We are trapped within our own biohistorically generated intelligence, which allows us to, we see the world through our physically evolved eyes, hear it through our physically evolved ears. We see certain frequencies of light and not other frequencies of light. We hear certain things, etc. Um, Machines are different. So this is where Bitcoin is going to come in and be a little bit different. Humans construct the world through our relation to it because of our biohistorically generated apparatuses to perceive the world. Machines are different, right? Coding creates its own limits. It's not we're self-closed in our biological form in our brain, but machines, their limit is governed by code, not by evolution. They can,
Belief. Our
what's
limits
that?
are governed by belief. Yeah.
And so,
I'm throwing in a Tony Robbins thing. It's like that your limits are only and Joe Dispenza and a bunch of these people that are
yeah,
um but anyways they
in a
what
certain
I was
sense,
just
yeah, but think about
machines are limited by code, we're limited by belief.
but also by I can't see infrared, so I'm limited in that sense in my experience of
Gotcha.
the world by my eyes. So there's certain hard coded
Not
limitations
yet.
by how yeah. And so
So,
right.
and by the way, like this is real. Like
Yeah.
this research is now actually not a theory. It is real. Where it would be possible to turn on the gene that allows you to see in
Yeah.
infrared.
And even if we didn't have
That's
that
cra-
g yeah, even if we didn't have that gene, maybe we could some way change the human
you could put it
coding.
in. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a question, at what point does that thing cease to be human once it even has all of that changed subjectivity such that it can experience a world that humans, quote unquote, like evolved humans can't experience? But machines are different. They're already in the position where you can just change a line of code to change that machine's interaction with the world, the way that it generates a reality of the world. So that brings it back to Bitcoin. The limits of our project perception of the world are is our ability to construct it through our biohistorically generated physical apparatus and any modifications we make to it. Bitcoin, its creation of the world happens according to the code that comprises it, which code can be changed. So Bitcoins create a reality in them and are not limited in their doing that in the same way that humans are. Bitcoin defines its limits for itself and then creates objects through the limits that it has defined. It defines the notion of a transaction, a coin, what the difficulty adjustment is, and then through the definitions in its code, it brings those objects about by thinking them, in a sense, through the operation of the machine. It doesn't create time itself as it applies globally, universally. It creates through its code a notion of time that is particular to Bitcoin, which is the absolute succession of block time, which marks a before and an after. Does that make sense? As
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but that's where I see ties to my own lived experience, which is that I can't go backwards in time, and neither can
that's
Bitcoin.
also my lived experience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
ties.
and just making sure I'm not the only. I'm going to speak for you. Uh,
I'm gonna generalize a bit here. Yeah,
yeah, but yeah, I mean, and also that like what you do if you can separate the emotion from the information is collect wisdom. So wisdom is removing the emotion from the situation to take away a lesson, basically.
yeah,
um Knowledge applied knowledge
right.
is wisdom,
Yeah,
basically. Like, I know this, and therefore I will act upon it. Acting upon the knowledge is wisdom is a verb, basically. And so, what is that in Bitcoin? It is the next block that is advancing upon all the other blocks that were before. What is that in real life? That is, I learned this when I was younger, and therefore I act this way. And um, so in Bitcoin, this is the rules of the code that are instantiated within the code. In my lived experience, this is my truth, which is equivalent to belief.
yeah,
Like, because I believe this thing, it is true. And I'll always go back to, I love this story. Tony Robbins talks about this. There's a guy who is a dock worker. He gets trapped in a refrigerated container, and he ends up dying of hypothermia. And when they open the refrigerator, the next day, they find this body, and they find that he was writing a note, you know, please tell my people I love them, and I'm cold, and, I don't think I'm going to make it, et cetera, et cetera. They found out that the refrigerator container was broken. It never got colder than like 56 degrees. Yet this guy died of hypothermia because he believed that he was dying of hypothermia. And so your belief is your truth. And it comes to not just manifest in how you think, but it manifests in how you experience the world.
yeah,
And so, yeah, this is where I basically, I guess I'm seeing parallels
yeah. I can.
between
Yeah,
Bitcoin and my life.
And I
Yeah.
think that's Kantian critique is a way to do that too, is to identify those limiting beliefs that purport to be horizons for the possibility of our experience and showing maybe the falsity of some of those. Like maybe
That's
we
a
both,
beautiful way to say it, by the way. Like the horizons of experience. I think that's such a I just wanted to call that out because I think that's such a beautiful way to talk about what your limiting beliefs are. This
I
is
think,
the horizon.
yeah,
I could never I could never run a mile under 8 minutes. I could never, lift 225 pounds. I could never have a clean house. I could never
yeah,
be attractive to myself. I could never have good relationships because, and after because is always the limiting belief, the
yeah.
end of your horizon.
Right.
Yeah,
And so let's consider the horizons, the limits of Bitcoin through Kantian critique. That's kind of the next part here. The question of Kantian critique again is in a general, very general sense about finding the limit beyond which we cannot productively think about something. Critique for Bitcoin then is to consider the question of limits and conditions in relation to Bitcoin. This can generate a whole interesting set of questions, and Land does this a very interesting way. One way to look at it is, so what are Bitcoin's limits? Is it object or objectivity? Let me see. These are my notes now. Is it a condition from? Okay, here it is. So, is Bitcoin an object, a single bounded thing, or is it the condition itself, the condition for the making of future objects, a bootloader for something else? To say that in a different way, then more less abstract, if Bitcoin is money, then this means maybe we don't yet know the limits of money because Bitcoin is changing what is possible with money. And you mentioned this earlier, we're born into a notion of fiat money that constrains our world. Bitcoin sets a new limit, expands the limit, or explodes the limit because we don't yet know even what it will become if it is a form of money. Some of the examples, like the increasing financialization of things, is changing the limiting condition, the limiting belief of what can be money. A tokenized house can be money. I can give you a piece of a house in Florida, and because it's transferable or whatever, it's a form of money. There's also a new trend, what is money, a trend of converging money and intelligence by monetizing general purpose problem solving, such as Polymarket, right? That's intelligence in some way is becoming money because people are wagering through these markets. And so Bitcoin, as Kantian critique, explores the limiting condition of what money can even be. It is, yeah, I'll stop there. There's a lot in that.
yeah, no, that's the prediction markets. Talking about them as turning intelligence into money because intelligence is money. Um, it's just revealing what we've always known, but it allows for a more full and immediate expression of intelligence as money. And this is one of the arguments that I've heard a number of people make lately, which is that we should really rethink our our stance on this idea of insider trading, um, because insider trading is something that happens in traditional markets, but it's obfuscated. You really can't. It's harder to stop, and it's therefore seen as criminal and all these other things. But in poly market, if you know, if I see a bunch of bets being placed, it gives me an idea of where people in the know are standing on a current position.
It
It's more clear
taps
and
it taps
open.
into untapped intelligence, right? This
Yeah,
insiders have
yeah,
secret information
and
and the market liberates that secret information.
yeah, and it's like it allows for like why should you not trade on inside information? Like that this is always this is a this is not And by the way, this is not something to laugh at,
That's Bilbo
right? Like
looking at the
it's,
ring. Why should I not trade on insider information, right?
but we all do that. Like we
Yeah,
all do this. We just say, "Oh, well, if it's in reference to this thing, then you're
yeah,
not allowed to do it. If it's in reference to this." However, you're not allowed to do it unless you are a politician. You're not allowed to do it unless you are
yeah,
able to access the higher tier
right.
of our two-tiered legal system to protect
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah,
You're not allowed to do it if.
right.
Yet when I'm playing basketball and I see that a guy just sprained his ankle and I decide to take and drive on him to the side that he just sprained that ankle,
Vicious.
is that insider information? I don't know. I saw it. Maybe 8 other people on the court didn't see him sprain his ankle. So am I not allowed to act on that? We have this idea that we're only not allowed to act on insider information in public markets. But what really is a public market? Poly market is a
Yeah,
public market. But
I see your
the
point. I see your
US
point.
stock market's not really a public
Yeah,
market. It's not accessible to people outside of the United States. It's not accessible outside of the hours of 9 to 3:30, et cetera, like all this other
yeah.
stuff.
No, I see your point. I mean, so poly market prediction markets like that, to the extent that they harness insider information, maybe there's an upside to that, even though
There's a Well, okay, so
there's a huge
this is
upside. There is an upside.
but
Okay, so there is an
one
upside.
of the one of the one of the poly market, like, recently was like, will the US bomb Iran?
Yeah,
And there was a massive jump in, like, yes, they will. And that was very good information for people in Iran.
true. Yeah,
Um,
that's
right.
true.
And so what did that do? It levels the play again. At its heart, what is technology? Technology is deflationary. It means it allows for us to do more with less, but it's also democratizing. Deflation or technology is democratizing. It means that more people have access to better information
Yeah,
and therefore make better decisions, right? So prior to Polymarket, prior to Twitter, etc., um, you know, people just got bombed and they had no idea it was coming. And it's actually good for both sides to know that this is going to happen. It is good in the end. It's not good for somebody to become a victor, but what it is good for is to discourage from people from fighting, right? If you lose the advantage of surprise, Sun Tzu, that is like that's the greatest weapon that you can have. And so if you lose the greatest weapon that you can have, you are now disincentivized to wage war. If you're disincentivized to wage war, that's good for everyone because what is war? War is taking productive resources and turning them into unproductive resources.
I mean that's to
It's
assume
just
that every war
we're
is
going
if
to
so.
build.
Not
Well, I
every.
mean, it's just we're going to build shit, and then we're going to use that shit that otherwise would have been made for tennis shoes and houses and movies and cars,
Gross consumerism. Bleh.
and we're going to blow stuff up.
Instead of dying in the glory of an honorable war, you want tennis shoes. Ha! What
I
a.
don't think war's awful.
So, but like, not all war is bad in the sense that sometimes the alternative to war is even worse. If it's counterfactual futures, but Iran develops a nuke and they drop it on some place that's bad. North Korea is untouchable now as a place of like a nation of hackers that we can't do anything about because they have nukes. And so, denying if the effects of unharnessed prediction markets is that they prevent all preemptive war or all war as such, then that just helps
I'm not
incumbents
saying
who
it
want
predicts it. I'm saying it disincentivizes it. And
or
by the
this.
way,
Yeah,
I think the proper lens to look at Iran getting a nuclear bomb is the same lens through which we looked at North Korea, which everyone said the exact same thing. North Korea gets a nuke, they're going to use it. They got nukes, they're not using it. They're using them as a deterrent, just like every
yes,
other person that has nukes. It would be illogical to think otherwise because you have evidence of there's 9 nuclear powers now and only one of them has used them. Every other one has used them as a deterrent.
yeah,
So it would be illogical to think. And by the way, this is I listened to a guy. He's a some Harvard professor that talks about like his whole thing, his whole area of study is like Iran and nuclear conflict with Israel and stuff. He's like, that'd be the dumbest thing they could do, right? They get a nuke, they bomb Israel, and now they are just nuked out of existence.
Right.
Not that stupid. And regardless of what you think about where you're going to exist in the afterlife, people do still have a tie to want to live.
And to
And
not
so
being nuked. Yeah.
yeah, and so he was like, yeah, the most likely scenario is that they get a nuke, they test it to show the world that they have it,
Uh,
and then now you have a nuclear deterrent just like North Korea has one.
right.
So
Just one final point, but then if a power has nukes, then it does have the deterrent power, and it can launch infinite number of like surreptitious like terrorist element cells from its borders, and you cannot then restrain that power if it's doing something like that, right?
you could say the exact same thing about the United States. So
Uh,
this just becomes
if
a moral battle.
except that I'm a patriot and would never do such a thing. So time is
Yeah,
a concern.
which just means that you align with the morality of the system
Absolute.
that you were born in.
No, not 100%, but I'm unabashedly pro-American. You got that right. Um, so time is a concern of Bitcoin. Let's see here. This will be a good spiel right here. This is a good thing to take from cryptocurrent. We've been alluding to this, that time is a concern of Bitcoin, and we did discuss Dirt GG's Bitcoin in Time, and also Brady Swinson's excellent TED Talk, not TED Talk, Bitcoin conference in Prague, I think, where
Yeah,
he
it felt
did.
like a TED talk. But
Yeah,
yeah.
right. That it was good. It was high production on the perception or sociology of time in relation to Bitcoin. So people begin to think about time when they think about Bitcoin. And Land does that too. With critique, we consider Bitcoin through philosophy and time. After Kant, again, philosophy seeks to understand time, but not time as a transcendent object above the world, but an object inside the world, an aspect of ordering the world, a necessary precondition of experience. Philosophy seeks in vain to understand time. With Bitcoin, we fabricate a subjectivity to decrypt time. Decryption of eminent, this is Land here, just to get some more of his prose out. Decryption of eminent order is the destiny of transcendental philosophy, whatever the nature of the subjectivity that will be fabricated to accomplish it. So he's saying creating Bitcoin has created a point of view upon the world where time is different. And this is, again, as Bitcoin constructs its blocks and orders them, through the difficulty adjustment is its notion of time. There are limits to our own subjectivity, our own point of view and way of experiencing, which are hardwired into us. We can only decrypt certain aspects of reality. We can perhaps build new subjectivities, though, that can decrypt other aspects, which is what Bitcoin does. The cryptographic definition of time is a cultural side product of the Bitcoin protocol, not a scientific definition of time, the nature of time as such, but a cultural side product of the Bitcoin protocol. Instead of the prior idea of a now on a timeline, we get the block as a unit ordered successively on chain, from which we then extrapolate, again, a cultural notion of time, not a scientific one. Bitcoin.
But does that mean that it can't be a scientific definition?
So here's what Land says on that. Bitcoin is superior to physics as far as time is concerned. Bitcoin itself doesn't refute relativity, quantum theory as a physical theory. Instead, Bitcoin produces a better version of time than does the physical universe, because the physical universe leads us into all these paradoxes. Bitcoin itself produces a better time. It restores absolute succession within its domain. So the characteristics of Bitcoin time, which it fabricates, which is a cultural side product of its production, is that it's absolute. Because if time is relative, we get the double spend problem. It is non-geometric because its succession is temporal and not spatial. Time is not a dimension for Bitcoin. It's discrete, as you say. It's also synthetic. It can't anticipate innovation. It leads to an element of unpredictability in the discovery of a block, right? It synthesizes a future based on our interaction with it, which leads to a chaotic discovery process. It's also intensive, and you mentioned this, intensive in that the order of succession is a serial envelopment, the Merkle tree, right? That in each block embeds the past within it so that we get this constant enveloping of its prior versions within each block. So why is Bitcoin time better than the time of the physicist? Our experience of time as the ordered one-dimensional nature of existence is better encapsulated by Bitcoin than it is by quantum theories, physical theories, scientific theories. They don't really match our own experience, whereas Bitcoin is designed to create an artificial sense of time that matches onto our human experience of time. So Bitcoin is superior to physics then because physics can only come after our experience to give us certain physical mathematical explanations that don't really match onto our first person point of view, whereas Bitcoin creates a point of view, fabricates a subjectivity that is machine but is also comprehensible to humans. It acknowledges that, so Land acknowledges that general relativity means time can be absolute in this sense only locally, only within Bitcoin. He says, here's a quote from him that his Landian, but we'll read it. General relativity is the double spending problem. It is locally soluble through time chunking, but only locally. Across expanses exceeding the practical scale of a block moment, consensus becomes unreachable. The chain has then to disintegrate. Absolute time is attainable only by becoming many. So if we did want Bitcoin time to be universal time, we couldn't because you can't get consensus over that intergalactic scale, right? It disintegrates. You can't get the 10-minute block height. You'd have to create new chains in different areas, each of which would be their own oasis of fabricated time that matches onto our point of view if we're in that location. Does that make sense?
Okay, couple things. Yeah, but let's talk about this. So first, I want to say, so discrete time. The way that you said it was that Bitcoin views time as discrete, not as a dimension. But I think the correct way to say that is that it views it as a dimension that is discrete. So it is a dimension, just like time
How does it view it as a
in the
dimension,
quantum.
though? There's no dimensionality
But
to the operation of
it's a
Bitcoin.
dimension that can't be. So continuous time is a dimension that cannot be measured. What, like, and this is like going back to the Nick and Jack thing. What they're just saying is that time is a dimension.
Why?
No
Why do
one
you,
disagrees.
how can you, I disagree with that. Again, the Bitcoin time is not dimensional. It's only about absolute succession. So time has,
So yeah, but
yeah,
every other dimension that we know is about it is discrete. Height, weight, length, depth. These are discrete.
discrete in
They're
it, and that it has
dimensions.
units that can be measured or something like, or like,
Yes,
yeah.
that's what we're saying is that it has units that can be measured. That's all we're saying. Is that so? Anyways, that's what I wanted to say. Um, and I guess okay. So the next thing that you're saying is that um, that you can't apply the Bitcoin time. Let's just call it proof of work. Basically, you can't apply this proof of work definition of time to anything outside of Bitcoin. Yet, in my lived experience, when I am doing work, that is a different perception of time than when I'm not doing work. When I'm running, that's a wholly different perception of time than when I'm doom scrolling, right? One flits by and there's nothing to show for it. One of them seems to last, you know, running a mile seems to last days in the experience of the person doing it
Yeah.
sometimes. And we have this perception, like you have this, there is this perception of how time flows, and that changes based on the amount of work that you're putting in. If you're in the flow state, then time can appear to either pass very quickly or it can appear to pass incredibly slow. So in the instance of like, um, say a football game where a receiver is going up for a incredibly difficult catch or whatever, and afterwards they describe that to you and they describe it in this perfectly, I sensed this and I turned this and I did it. And you look back and you're like, that all happened in like a third of a second, yet it took you 5 minutes for you to describe everything that you felt.
Hmm.
During that time, your perception of time had widened. However, if you think about something in a different manner, you can say that like um, maybe doing something very difficult, maybe being in a cold plunge for 20 minutes or whatever, um, that can actually feel like it shrinks down, because you are so engaged in the time. So your experience of time is different based on the work that is being put in, but also our experience of time is local. So, like the movie, what is it called? Interstellar, right? This is all based upon the truth that time is relative to gravity. So if you go to a different place, and speed, right? So if you go to some place that you're moving very, very fast, then time is perceived differently. By the way, they've done this experiment, right? They put watches on astronauts. One stayed on the ground, the other went into space. They came back, their watches don't match,
Hmm.
right? Um, and there's further examples of that where, as we talk about, like as you approach the black hole, this is
Event
the
horizon.
right the horizon, the event horizon, right? Where we see this person fall into the hole, but for them, it would what we assume is that it lasts forever.
Yeah.
Um, so time is local there as well. So
Uh-huh.
what I'm saying is that I don't think that I don't think we can say definitionally that time is um, that time as the way proof of work experiences it is entirely different to this perception of time that we have, because this perception of time that we have is also local.
No, and Bitcoin is cannily created to match on to the human because block heights are set at 10-minute intervals. And so the cultural production of the Bitcoin protocol is a notion of time as we interact with it, which is we see the 10-minute roughly emergence of blocks. And so it's not like Bitcoin has its own notion of time which it fabricates, and subjectivity definitely interacts with that time. So I think yeah.
It's not time, it's work, right? Bitcoin has a notion of work that is bounded by,
Yeah.
this amount of work must occur. Like it's not impossible, and it's happened before for a Bitcoin block to be solved in a
Yes,
second.
you're right.
Also, not possible for a Bitcoin block to be solved in 2 days,
Yes.
right? It's not time dependent; it's work dependent, and time is merely what
A cu
comes out of that
right,
as a byproduct.
a cultural side product, right. And so that's kinda what he's saying is, like, we're using the word time in a bunch of different senses here, which is confusing, but Bitcoin, again, just creates absolute succession. It just creates an order, and then uses statistical probabilities to peg that ordering at roughly 10-minute intervals so that humans can interact with it. We can call that time or not call that time, any part of that, but that's what it does, right? Yeah, cool. Um, so critique. Another way to look at this then, Kantian critique, Bland says, is Kantian critique is a form of network thinking. The function of a system is due to the entire network, not some fact of the thing within the system. So critique means flattening the network. Eliminate transcendence, no critical nodes. There are layers where there's a separation of formats or conditions for creating possible objects on that layer, but there is no transcendent element that controls all of the layers. Temporalization occurs, absolute succession is reproduced. Um, the network emerges from an internal principle, not top down. So, network thinking, again, this is another way to look at Kantian critique as Land is applying it, where we can identify, like, the network shows us that to have a critical node is an error. If we apply critique to modern technosocial arrangements, we can identify the philosophical error of metaphysical speculation, which occurs when the function of a system is identified with some dominant aspect internal to the system. The network is the server. No, it's not. The network is the miner. No, it's not. It's the operation of all of these things. all of these things are conditions for producing objects within the network and not the network itself. So what is the point of that? Bitcoin as critique targets transcendence in the form of trusted third parties. Instead of having a trusted third party to kind of referee the reality of the system, Bitcoin referees its own reality by creating it through the operation of its elements. Instead of arguing that that systems should have no trusted third parties, Bitcoin simply does it in its operation. It simply operationalizes philosophy in that way. Um, does that make sense as a way to look at it? Like,
Yeah, thinking about consciousness, right? So
yeah,
this meditation, psychedelics, experiences that and scientific evidence showing that there is a there's a universal consciousness,
uh-huh.
and it can be God, it can be whatever, but um, that is that's the network, right? There's no critical node in this universal consciousness. There is we I think that that's where we make the error of considering ourselves the critical node, of considering ourselves, this is the evolution of this individuality of man, as opposed to man as a part of consciousness, as a part of. It's not the Bitcoin example. It's not the server, or it's not the ledger. It's not the node. It's not the miner. It is everything. Um, and that is when we perceive consciousness at a level that is greater than ourselves, as the universe being interconnected. Um, which, by the way, that's Nick Land's kind of like pet hobby, or major hobby, or numerology. This idea of synchronicities, and the computational universe, that um, everything is interconnected. Um, so I
That
don't know,
no, no,
that's
yeah,
where
that
we're
brings
talking about.
that brings us to the next point. I mean, I think because so Nick Land does have an idea of retrocausality of the future coming into the present, not arising from the past. What does that even mean, right? To be retrocausal in that way. Hyperstitional is an idea of Land's where reality concepts bring about their own reality. You have things that are pulling themselves into being, emerging from the future in a sense. So what does that mean? Bitcoin can tell us something about. So to further consider Bitcoin philosophically, consider Bitcoin and teleology. Teleology, telos is the root of that. Telos is the end or goal towards which something moves. Teleology is the study of goals, then, something like that, the science or knowledge of goals and ends towards which we move. For systems, emergent complexity, spontaneous order of a system can be thought of as its telos, as the goal of the system. That which emerges is the principle of intelligibility towards which the system is drawn. The telos, or the goal of the system, emerges from the system. The goal of the system doesn't start as an object within the system nature of its operation is not a fact that's accessible within the system. So to say that another way, maybe it's clearer. Within a system, a spontaneous order occurs based on particular facts interacting according to the laws of the system. As order increases from the interaction of facts with the rules of the system, you can see order moving toward something in a direction that is not wholly given in advance by the rules. The rules don't say, system, you will become this type of thing. The rules just say, if you do this, then this happens. You can't do this, you can do that. And then from the rules and the interaction of people with the rules, something emerges. So here are some ideas concretely of teleological systems, and also kind of their telos, or their end goal, so we can kind of understand what that is. Capitalism. The end goal is kind of the spontaneously emerging principle of order is the growth of abstract value. So capitalism is about growing value. It's moving towards that goal. the future is pulling capitalism in that direction in a sense. The internet, the telos of the internet, the goal was distributed communication. Spontaneously, it becomes more distributed. The internet becomes more itself the more it increases and preserves distributed communication. Bitcoin's end goal or telos is TikTok next block, absolute succession, a principle by which you have one block of transaction coming after another block, and that other block being before, preserving that absolute succession, solving the double spend problem. That's the goal of the Bitcoin network. With teleology, this understanding of the importance of goals in guiding the growth of a system, to quote Land, each real individual, without exception, strives to become what it is or it ceases to be. Bitcoin strives through increased computational hashing power to reinforce and preserve its absolute succession. If it does not do that, if the blockchain loses its order, then it ceases to be. Does that make sense? Like teleology then guiding, having a goal moves something toward the future in a determinable direction that you can't predict in advance, but which evolves it necessarily towards what the system is striving to be.
Just makes me, I'm just relating this back all to human experience again, which is
That's good to ground it.
the, yeah, the, the human experience is that you become something. And if you don't become that thing, then you, you live a life of inadequacy and lack of fulfillment. And, um, you, you know, life just passes you by. Um, but if you strive to become and continue to work towards that thing which is unknown to you in the beginning, but as long as you are continuing to move towards a goal, then you can. I thought about this the other day, and the analogy that I was thinking about was like always moving forward. Jocko Willink is always talking about, or I think it's, I don't know, but anyways, having a forward center of mass, always moving forward, move forward, just keep going.
Yeah.
Um, Thinking about like climbing a mountain. y- A mountain is at the bottom. There are nearly infinite paths that you can take. There's all kinds of different, just because the bottom is bigger, there are more possibilities. As you get closer and closer to the top, as you move further and further towards your goal, then you limit the routes that you can take. And so therefore you are refining basically this idea of what is the goal? Who am I supposed to be? Who am I to become? Where am I heading? Um, and so, yeah, the more that you move towards that goal, the more clear the goal becomes, I
Yes.
guess,
Yeah.
is probably the more it's revealed to you.
The more you become
Yeah, the paths become limited because they are, because you've done this, you've gone through this swamp of of every possibility, and now you're reaching this peak of limited possibilities.
of realization of the thing that you have to become, you move from potential and virtual into actual and real. When you start the study to become a doctor, you have all the potential to become a doctor. You realize that goal by, as you say, discarding all the other possibilities of what you could become, but also by realizing all of what it takes to be a doctor, getting the education, practicing as a doctor. The virtual becomes the real as it's pulled towards its goal and actualizes. So definitely. And it requires constant movement. It's not, you can't sit still and achieve the goal. Even to be yourself, you have to strive to become what you are, is what Land is saying. I think that's a good general point. And it's going to tie into something he says later, that the will to power that we all have is about increasing our capacity to be what we are, which is an interesting way to put that. It's like what I am, how do I increase that capacity to be what I am? But it is about fully realizing a capacity means constantly increasing it. In our world, if you sit still, you get eaten, you get out competed, out evolved, out everything, right? You have to keep on moving even if you want to sit still.
The, um, I told you about this book that I'd listened to by Napoleon Hill. It was called like Interview with the Devil or Conversation with the Devil or something like that. Um, and in that book, the devil talks about how he causes people to suffer. And the way that he causes people to suffer is through drifting. And drifting would be see the reason I'm saying this is because we're talking about how you have to continually be moving. You can't just sit still. However, you can sit still. You can like this is meditation to transcend, to
Right.
reach the
But that's
goal.
spiritual
So
movement
sometimes
though. That's not,
yeah,
yeah,
sometimes the goal is sitting still.
right.
But what is always damaging is that I guess so if we, let's if we presume that, everything is causal, that time is moving forward, then we're never sitting still. Then we're always in some sort of motion. But the fault would be drifting. The fault would be
Yes.
moving not
Deviating.
towards something. It would be, just existing
Yep.
as opposed to moving towards the telos,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. That's a great way to put it. The teleology indicates any movement that's not movement towards the goal is movement away from the goal, or anything that's not movement
Yeah,
towards the
yeah,
goal.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah. I just want to find the title of that book here, just because I want to recommend that to anybody who has made it this deep into the conversation because this is incredible. To me, one of the more impactful experiences that I've had listening to a book. I didn't read it, but yeah, I just found this idea of drifting, right? How do we how do we ruin our lives? The way that we ruin our lives is through drifting. It's through scrolling, doom scrolling. It's through, shallow conversation, outwitting the devil. That's what it's called, outwitting the devil. Through these shallow conversations, it's through not having this aim, not
yeah.
moving towards that telos.
Yeah, no, Jordan Peterson said this. Who knows if it's true, but it's something Jordan Peterson said, so we can take it for what it is. He said that sin etymologically means missing the mark. And so,
Yeah.
you sin
Well,
against
that's not
yourself.
Jordan. That's just Jordan Peterson saying what is
I
true.
hope so, because I like it. So
Yeah.
any sort of deviation from your telos, your end goal, is sinning, whether you're Christian or not, because you're not being what you need to, you're not becoming what you need to become, which is who you are. So this notion of teleology gives us an implicit response to David Graeber. So let's bring in a hugely interesting part of this conversation. This is going to go back to our Land talks about Graeber in here. He goes into his theories in detail. This is a really great dialogue with what we've already talked about. It goes back to our discussion of Natalie Smolinski's essay Toward an Anthropological Theory of Money.
Yes, where she eviscerated David Graeber.
She does. And Land makes some excellent comments related to this. So Graeber argues that so David Graeber, late anthropologist, important theorizer for the Occupy Wall Street movement, as I remember, smart guy, but socialist anarchist. So Graeber argues that money does not arise to solve the problem of barter. That was one of his points. He gives like a historical anthropology. He does the anthropology of humans, or anthropology of humans, redundant. He does anthropology, and he says historically, money did not arise to solve this problem of barter where someone tries to trade ducks for corn, but the person really wants foxes or whatever, It doesn't evolve to facilitate trade in that way. For Graeber, historically, anthropologically, debt precedes money. Complex social systems of indebtedness, including cosmic indebtedness through religion or social practices of gift giving, even the picking nits or whatever off the back of an ape, these complex systems of reciprocity, of being indebted in those small ways socially, precede monetary exchange. In this way, someone like Graeber mocks the idea of the rational economic agent on which capitalism is based. So he says that person doesn't even exist. It's just an abstraction. It's not anthropologically, sociologically, or historically real. So, a lot of times capitalists say, consider a rational economic agent, and like we can justify our systems this way. People will act in such a manner, and like we get past barter because rationally we need a way to solve this problem where we can freely exchange goods. Graeber's like, that rational economic agent doesn't even exist. It didn't exist historically. It's an anthropological falsity. Land comes in and says, this misses the point. Homo economicus, this rational man, the rational economic agent, is not an entity in the world, but a regulative ideal, a telos towards which the system is moving. The system does not begin with the rational economic agent, it creates it. So rational economic agents are a creation of capitalisms, not the creators of it. Homo economicus is not actually a fact in the world, but rather the target or extrapolated optimal outcome of certain definite historical processes. Again, it's a telos. So game theoretic situations create ideal players of the game. Implicit within capital, quoting Land again, is a template for the kind of people it wants, and which, given only time and opportunity, it will automatically produce. If humans reject playing the game of capitalism, then artificial agents will emerge constructed to play it, who will play it and play it better. So this is such a beautiful response to Graeber, who says, it's all ridiculous. There was no moment when capitalism emerges rationally because people need to solve the problem of barter. I have the historical evidence to show this, the record. And Land comes in and says, you may be right, but this is the way capitalism is going, because the end goal of capitalism is creating the agent that solves the problem of barter. And it's going to keep on moving in that direction because that's the telos of the system.
Yeah. You pull the lice out of my fur, and I choose not to pull the lice out of your fur. And what happens is that you don't help me out next time.
Yeah.
And I learn, that's the game theory at play, and it's altering my behavior because of the consequences that I realized by not aligning with the optimal game theoretic move, which would be to work in cooperation. That, by the way, and this is one of the things that takes us again to one of, I think, is the beauties of Bitcoin. And um, uh, yeah, basically is that it's collaboration, not competition. So with the dollar system, we're all competing to get as many dollars as we can, as fast as we can, because they become worth less over time and we lose. Um, However, with Bitcoin, we are incentivized to not sell out, to not prioritize today or over tomorrow, because we become wealthier over time. And by the way, as Jeff Booth says, this is the natural state of things. The natural state of things is deflation, because technology makes things better. It gives us more for less. But that has been obscured because of the influx of inflation. As incredible as the technological advance has been, where 150 years ago we were on trains and riding horses, and now we have nuclear power and we have jets and we're doing all this other, all these other incredible things. As incredible as that advance has been, inflation has outpaced it. It's gone faster than technological advance. And we're finally reaching this point where technological advance is accelerating faster than inflation, at least right now. The problem is that technological advance actually has limitations. Fiat money has none. And so, theoretically you can inflate faster than you can technologically advance, which is why, of course, we exit the system in order to benefit from technology by saving in Bitcoin as opposed to saving in something that can be inflated faster than the technology can be improved.
Yeah. Land is going to have something very interesting to say on inflation. I think I'm going to move toward that. There's one other point here I'm going to skip, but I'm just going to note what it is in case people are of interest. If you've gotten this far into the conversation and your interest is that you're a scholar of Immanuel Kant and you want to see more how Land converts Kantian critique into a way to look at Bitcoin, Kant famously has an analytic synthetic distinction. Land does a really interesting move where he considers asymmetric cryptography as a true instantiation of the um, synthetic a priori, which is a category that Kant strive to find something that fit within. And Land does some really interesting moves on that, but it's really getting in the weeds. And so let's see here, that would move us on to chapter 3, which is getting into that inflation, getting really into Bitcoin as money. It's called Bitcoin and its doubles. So focus on semiotics. This is a focus on semiotics and Bitcoin as a solution to the double spend problem. What is semiotics? So semiotics is the study of signs, meaning, representation, communication. Like words falls within the study of semiotics because those are signs to help represent meaning. A sign, radically simplified, is something that represents or means something else. The word tree is the sign that points or refers to the actual physical tree. So semiotics studies these signs, these ways of referring to things. Why is the semiotics, the study of signs and representation, relevant to Bitcoin? Well, money is a sign, a way to represent value. Commodity money, consider that. The sign is the money, and the gold coin points to the gold to which it is composed. With cash money, the sign is separate from the substance. The paper is worthless, but it references a promise to pay, or a further commodity that backs it. Non-cash fiat money, so you're no longer trading notes, you simply have a ledger in a bank, like an entry in a bank ledger. No longer any physical substance to point to something else. It points only to itself as a sign, which is to say it refers back to a system of accounting that depends on political and administrative considerations. The general problem with all of these, including commodity money, is that signs themselves are not inherently credible. Even commodity money, once it becomes a sign pointing to something else, even pointing purportedly to its own weight in gold, can be corrupted, right? You can clip the coin, you can debase the coin, mix other metals in it, and then one coin, the sign, then points to actually a falsity, a lesser weight of gold than one coin purports to point to. So the problem of signs in the realm of money, looking at it through semiotics here, signs are cheap, so it's easy to substitute the sign for the thing. We want the thing, but you get the sign. I want an ounce of gold, but instead I get a coin of gold that purports to be an ounce, but is actually less. Signs are cheap, they can be debased and they can be corrupted in a sense. The problem of counterfeiting arises when we begin to accept signs as money, which is a form of the double spend problem, as Land argues, in that signs can be mimicked. Um, I guess another way to put that, we have to trust signs in order to in order to accept them as currency. I have to accept that the one coin refers to the amount of weight of gold that it purports to refer to. For that, we need a credentialing system that is external, that protects it. The problem of being able to double spend signs, the lack of security of signs as currency in representation, is also, just to take it to another level. I guess before I even get to that, the next point is incredibly interesting, but I want to isolate it as a point. Does that make sense to talk about money as signs? So again, the word tree is a sign that points to the tree. Money is a sign that points to a thing of value or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You won't be surprised, but it made me so now I'm thinking about love, where love is,
That actually did
you
surprise me.
yeah. So love is it's meaning. It is something that we have a word to describe it,
Yes.
yet that word can be counterfeited
Yeah.
in order
Right.
to, right,
I
you
love
know,
you. Can you buy me these shoes?
exactly,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And
Words are
so,
cheap.
but yeah, it's a but for someone that has experienced love, it's more of an action, right? It's more of a verb. It's more of a, love is what you do, for someone rather than how you feel for someone. And in the same way, Bitcoin, with proof of work,
Right.
it's what it does rather than what it just points to. Um, is that there's energy, there's work, there's effort, being applied, and on the other side of that is value. And we don't have that. I wanted money, instead I got the dollar. I didn't really want money either. I just wanted value.
Yeah.
Um, and instead I got the dollar, which is, a promise that is, reneged upon over time, much like telling someone you love them in order to get something out of them now, is a promise that's reneged upon over time.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And
yeah,
anything that points is a promise that you're pointing to the thing itself and not that yeah, that there's a credentialing system that verifies that the pointing is accurate. I love that phrase. I wanted money and I got the dollar. You should write a song. And I mean, that's beautiful because that's how we all feel. We wanted something of value and instead we got the dollar.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Or what Peter Thiel said. They promised us flying cars, and instead we got 140
there we
characters.
go.
Like that.
Yeah.
You switch.
So what does it mean then to make a sign valuable, which is what Bitcoin does? You pointed to the proof of work. Another way to look at this is we need credentials again. We need to verify that the sign is attached to the value in a secure way. So let's look at it, take a backward step. Um, what makes signs not valuable? Well, they can be hijacked. You mentioned love, that can be hijacked and used in kind of a deceitful way. Consider viruses. A virus is a structure that hijacks signs. Viruses deliver code, genetic instructions to hijack a host's code reading machinery in service of its own values. When code controls, anything is subject to capture. What is programmed can be reprogrammed. We use signs to program. Signs can be corrupted. That's what viruses do. They hijack sign reading machinery or code. Trying to secure our signs and control representation is, in fact, a stage in Earth's biohistory. Land mentions a field I'd never heard of before, which is awesome, called zoosemiotics, the study of animals using signs, humans being one instance, but other things. So, zoosemiotics, camouflage and mimicry. When an insect looks poisonous, but it is not, that uses a sign, it hijacks a sign from the poisonous insect so that it can represent falsely that it is poisonous. In nature, if you read, you can misread even outside of classical kind of English language. Jason Lowery kind of talks about this. Signs are instructions, passwords, credentials, genetics. If you control signs, if you have administrative control over passwords and credentials, if you're the priest who controls the religious signs indicating who is righteous and saved, if you're the judge who controls judicial signs about who has the legal right to something, then you control resources through hijacking signs. So money to be a valuable sign requires credentials to show that it's not camouflage or mimicry or some other zoosemiotic form of manipulation. One way to look at this, the monetary problem of signs then is actually identical with the problem of spam. Spam, broadly speaking, is false signals, attempts to get you to misread something as valuable, which is not valuable. Spam is anti-money, money is anti-spam. Here's a quote from Land that I love. I sent you this when I was reading it. Spam experimentally demonstrates anti-money. It's just so pithy and it captures it perfectly. Spam is a false representation of value, an attempt to get you to misread. It's a virus hijacking your attention, attempting to, in order to extract value. It's zoosemiotics for humans. Any system that can credential signs or messages, protect it from spam, is already then a potential currency. And in fact, that's where Bitcoin begins, right? As a form in its prehistory before Bitcoin, we have Hashcash, a way to protect a system of protecting from spam. And so Bitcoin then is about credentialing signs through proof of work, as you pointed out, to avoid duplicity. And I love that word in this context because duplicity, duo, two, means there can be two of something purporting to be the same thing. That's the double spend problem. Bitcoin credentials to avoid duplicity or the double spend problem. And that's how Bitcoin is an evolutionary stage in our own biohistory to protect us from viruses, zoosemiotic spam, etc.
Yeah. So just hearing you talk about that, that were like the semiotics of like, so these symbols, words, which are symbols, um, can be hijacked. Um, so I just had all of these things rolling through my head, the Inflation Reduction Act, which just created inflation,
Yeah.
stable coins, which are guaranteed, as Jeff Booth calls them, guaranteed loss coins. You are just guaranteed to lose value over time because they are saved in U.S. Treasury bonds, which U.S. Treasury bonds are known as risk-free return, or as Balaji calls them, return-free risk,
Huh. Yeah.
because that's what you are. You're guaranteed to lose over time, and you're exposing yourself to that risk. I thought of the rainbow flag,
Yeah.
co-opted by the trans movement to become this symbol of violence, the modern day swastika, prioritizing, prioritizing one class of people over all other
Yeah.
classes of people, um, and demonizing, those at the bottom as well, removing rights and stuff like that. So, yeah, this is evident all around us.
Yeah.
Um, and in fact, this is kind of one of my heuristics for life now, is to invert this Charlie Munger's advice, always invert, you know, to always invert whatever it is the person is telling you, whatever the thing is called, invert that, and you usually come at the truth. The Inflation Reduction Act created more inflation than we've ever seen. Stable coins are guaranteed loss coins. The rainbow is this symbol of love when it actually stood for hate. Stuff like that. So,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
words are cheap, man. And it's so lovely to look at Bitcoin as a solution to the problem of the deceit of words. We don't have to rely on um somebody's use of signs to convince us of something, some silver tongued or fork tongued or whatever seducer to sell us inflation reduction. Instead, you can look at the code and use Bitcoin. Just to look at Bitcoin as a stage in human historical, just our evolutionary history, that we're evolving past the deceit of signs, which is something that we used for a long, long time. Insects use it to sing, to pretend that there's something else. Birds use it. Deceit is part of nature. Nature hides itself, as Heraclitus said, as Nick Land begins Cryptocurrent, this essay, this book. Bitcoin, in a sense, moves us past that, by giving us, what does it do? So here's the next part. How does Bitcoin do that? Bitcoin protects its signs by including a chain of custody for each of its coins. Each coin is a history of transactions of that coin. In order to have a secure history, Bitcoin creates its own sense of time and ordering, as we've talked about, in the form of absolute succession, block after block. Bitcoin is an important historical event, or philosophical event, because in creating and protecting this history, It is the technical initiation of absolute succession. It signals the moment when history enters a phase of what he says is synthetic ontology, the techno commercial production of being. Being is now grounded in this self organizing foundation of structures like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the highest tribunal for its own signs. There's nothing outside of Bitcoin that says this coin is bad, that coin is good. Bitcoin's the rules of the system determines what the coins of the system, the value within the system. um, Bitcoin's virtual universe, this ontology that it creates, then it has agents or accounts, it has territories, which are wallets, it has objects, which are coins, it has events, which are transactions, it has a history, which is the blockchain, it has matter or substance, which is its computing power. The proliferation of this ontology leads to the sorts of spontaneous changes you see in diverse ecology, the way that ecological systems produce forms of order. You have niches, zones of specialization, competition, which can lead to a Cambrian explosion of innovation or something called techonomics, which is the next point. But that's a lot of just gesturing wildly as we talk about philosophical significance. So, what do you think?
I'm good on that. I'm good on that. I have nothing to add.
Right on. So techonomics, I began with talking about techonomics because it's a simple phrase, but it embodies so much of what Land is saying. One way to consider Bitcoin, is as the white paper, as the code. But really, when Land even says Bitcoin, he's talking about something different. He's talking about the historical event, the instantiation of the development of technological economics as infrastructure over time. So techonomic, again, technological plus economic, the technical operation bound with its own financially incentivized operation so that it's self-reproducing, self-reinforcing, no external authorities. The first time a commercial regime has been policed not by an army, not by some set of armed soldiers that march in the street and make sure everybody's behaving, but a commercial regime that polices itself spontaneously in the act of producing its objects of commerce, the coins, through techonomics. So capital already has two meanings, at least. Capital as machine stock, right? Capital machinery is used to make other things. We have a factory, that's capital, that produces the shoes. Capital is also referred to as investment, right? Investment, the financial backing we use to create new projects. We have capital as machine stock, capital as investment. Which form of capital is Bitcoin? It is both. It machines value, a factory, a money printer that actually prints money, that actually prints value. That is techonomics in a nutshell. What do you think about techonomics, Lucas?
I like the idea of things just not being enforced by violence.
That's good.
Uh, that was one of my earliest kind of revelations about Bitcoin that other people led me to. Um, the question that people always have about, well, it's not backed by anything. And then you get asked, well, what's the dollar backed by? The dollar is backed by the threat of violence from the United States military, and that has a cost, and it's an incredibly inefficient cost, by the way,
Yeah.
too. Um, and so, um, Bitcoin allows us to fully realize Nikola Tesla's version of intelligent machines doing battle, human out of the loop, to compete over scarce resources. Um, it's efficient. It's bloodless. Uh, does not leave bodies on the ground,
Yeah.
and so that's the just yet another one of the beauties of Bitcoin is that it 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 rules with absolute authority without the threat of violence or the reality of violence.
Yeah.
But something that we're experiencing right now,
Right.
um, in Iran. So
Techonomics, then, in your estimation, can be poised against what we currently have, which is I'm trying to like put together violence and economics, but there's got to be war economics or something, is what economy we currently have is only constitutable through violence to enforce fairness among parties and stuff like that. With
Yeah,
techonomics,
this is the Bretton Woods Act,
what's
right?
that?
I mean, this was the agreement out. This was the Bretton Woods. This was the agreement out of World War II.
It's all commercial
The world,
regimes, yeah.
yeah, the world will trade globally, um, and the U.S. will benefit because the world will use dollars to settle. And what will the U.S. provide in exchange for that? The threat of violence.
Yeah.
They will patrol the seas with their powerful navy, and anyone who stands in the way, anyone who is has enough hubris to try to trade oil in a currency outside of the dollar, they will find themselves the recipient of mass amounts of U.S. ordnance on their soil.
Yeah, and even going back, one tribe trading with another tribe, that only takes place because both tribes have spears. You know, if one tribe, if they don't both have spears, then one tribe just takes the thing. They don't trade. Commerce has always been protected implicitly, at least, by the backing of violence. With techonomics, there's another
Yes,
possibility.
I accept your recommendation for Iran having a nuclear warhead.
Right on. We got this camera view of your room. What they can't see is a ball above your computer has an Iranian flag hanging. So
I don't even know what that one
I
looks
don't
like.
either. I kind of generally know, but all flags except for the American flag just kind of blend into flagginess for me. So
Yeah, yes, flagginess.
yeah, we'll leave that word alone and move on. uh,
That's a word for Canada's flag. Yes.
your flag is really flaggy. I'm sorry, man. So yeah. um, the chapter 4 is I think a shorter one. State of and we're getting to the end here to where the chapters become shorter and shorter because Land, again, this is an ongoing project that maybe is not ongoing at this point, but Land is full of ideas, and I hope we're getting some of them out there so you take something away from this. There's so much here that can help people rethink Bitcoin, rethink society. Chapter 4, State of Play, Bitcoin and Game Theory. The general idea of game theory for Land is just that humans are social. We coordinate through game theoretic interactions with other agents. Tigers are not playing games with prey. They are asocial beings. They're not in a game. Bees, ants do not play games with each other. They are eusocial, eusocial, in that they operate through pheromones, right? Something like that, through chemicals. Humans are social. What sociality means that interactions are strategic with the possibility of defection. In a game theory, kind of coherently conceived, in a game theoretic situation, cheating is an option. Cheating is always a move within the game. There is no cheating that's a violation of the rules of the game. Cheating is allowed. The game theoretic game of chess includes the move of flipping the board because we're social. We can default. We can do things like that. No external referee outside the game. The game referees itself with incentives. If you throw over the board, I don't play with you again or something like that. The Byzantines' general problem. This is something that's referenced often within Bitcoin. It's a way of stating the double spend problem which Bitcoin solves. It's a game theoretic problem. The problem generally is the problem of achieving consensus among multiple parties when any particular party may be deceitful. In the game, the failure occurs when the parties in a distributed network can't reach consensus because they can't distinguish which communications are reliable or which nodes you can trust. With Bitcoin, cheating is permitted, so it accepts that the Byzantine generals, some of the generals might be traitors. So it doesn't just de facto trust a communication from one party. Instead, you determine trust or make trust irrelevant within the game itself. Bitcoin solves this through proof of work, incorporating it into the quote unquote messages, um, incorporates agreement about the message into the message, signal consensus by chaining blocks, build trust into the system without third parties. Um, Another aspect of games then is that the iterated resolution of playing the game leads to spontaneous order that you can't predict within the game. The actions of agents are unpredictable. Over iterations, they synthesize a new order that can't be perfectly predicted in advance. I think this is huge for me in understanding, like, game theory, as Land sees it, is about human sociality, and it's just essential to how humans interact, that humans are deceitful, or deceit is always a move for a human. We can always lie and steal and cheat and kill, things like that. And so, of course, Bitcoin as a solution allows that option within the game, but disincentivizes it because you're going to be wasting your hashing power if you're not participating to try to win the block reward.
Yeah, this is really good in the framing of it because it relates back to what Jason Lowry taught us about systems, which is that when if you're able to hack a computer system, that is not a fault of the system. It is how it was designed, and therefore it is incentivized as part of it. It is not that it is a bad system or a good system. It is merely a system that has options. And within that range, that set of options is the ability to get into it and make change, do things that are considered immoral. What we're doing is we're taking away the moral judgment
Yes.
of this.
Yeah.
We're saying it's not about morality. This is about um, this is about continuing to be able to play the game. I can cheat in the current system. In fact, I'm incentivized to cheat in the current system because I only suffer consequences if I get caught. And those consequences come after the reward of cheating. So there's already this probability that I won't get caught. And so I'm incentivized to cheat. But then I'm also further incentivized to cheat because in the inflationary system, what I have today is worth more than what it will be tomorrow. And so I'm incentivized to cheat today as opposed to cooperating over a long period of time. And the only limit upon that is how many people can I cheat before there is no one left for me to cheat. And again, that's dependent upon being caught. And being caught in our system is dependent upon not just the rules, but the enforcement of the
Yeah.
rules. And as we know in our current system, the enforcement of the rules does not apply to everyone equally. Um, you know, the wealthy have one
Yep.
set of rules that they make up, and then the rest of us, you know, rules for thee and none for
Right.
me. The rest of us are therefore subjected to abiding by these rules that are put in place. So, how does Bitcoin change that? Well, you you can cheat the system. You can, except in the fiat system, when you cheat, you get a reward. In in the Bitcoin system, when you cheat, you don't get a
Yeah.
reward. Right? You don't get anything. You get excluded. Um, and it's not yeah, the nice thing about that, by the way, is that you get a second chance. Like if you morally cheat me, I will likely make the decision to never associate with you again, never do business with you again, never whatever. If I'm a minor and I try to cheat, or if I'm a node runner and I try to cheat, um, then I lose out now. But if I conform to what the rules are in the future, then I'm allowed to play the game again. There's no grudges. There's no grudge being held on the blockchain. Um, and so, yeah, it incentivizes collaborative behavior. It incentivizes truth. It incentivizes cooperation. Yeah, it's all
Yeah,
good.
and what you said brings us right to the next point. One rule for the haves, one rule for the have-nots. Another way to say that is politics. The politics of Bitcoin
Yes.
then. So Bitcoin is a game that exists in a larger game, which is politics. Turning over the board is always a move that can be tried. They can try to ban Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin threatens the system because it's going to remove a realm of political decision making and ability to set the rules of the haves and the have nots. And so its adoption, even though Bitcoin is apolitical in its operation, its adoption is inherently political. And this is when you said left and right earlier, where land comes down. This is his statement, I think, on the politics of Bitcoin, in that its adoption is political exactly because it is apolitical. Bitcoin is not political. And when you remove things from politics, that's a very political decision. It antagonizes the central bankers, that class that want to regulate and who are afraid of autonomous capital. Bitcoin is anti-politics and left and the right, but the left specifically, I think, is about politicizing more and more spaces. The personal is the political is a phrase that emerges from cultural theory on the left. So being anti-political is political and against that move to make everything political. Here's a quote from Land Bitcoin that I summarize as Bitcoin as outsideness, which is a kind of a framework that Land uses, moving things to the outside away from human control. Non-dialectics is not a higher level of argument, but an escape from the oppositional relation into outsideness. This escape from the political is concretely instantiated by hard crypto security. Bitcoin epitomizes such a meta strategy, hence the extremity of its political economic provocation. So he notes some potential political backlashes. On the left, maybe, are those who embrace identity politics, potentially mobilizing political opposition to Bitcoin. And we're going to probably see more and more of this based on the disparate impacts according to race, ethnicity, people who want to define who are the haves. They're going to go against Bitcoin because Bitcoin resists allocating to a specific race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, identity, etc. But there also could be a Luddite political backlash of people who, on one level, maybe just don't even see Bitcoin as real money. It's just invisible internet money, right? They can't even conceive of technology creating a money. Also, gold bugs, too, though, people stuck in a certain past and not wanting to move forward. There's also political factions within Bitcoin, and this is going to be huge as we move into the quantum security, BIP 361, these types of things, when we debate what's going to happen to Satoshi's coins as the system upgrades its signatures to be quantum secure. Two factions, he notes, are the mainstreamers and the ultras. The mainstreamers see Bitcoin as a tool which can be assimilated into society as it exists. The ultras see Bitcoin as a weapon that will require current institutions to reform. The block size war was one war in this factional struggle, and I think we're entering a new one. Which is interesting. Is decentralization within Bitcoin incentivized by Bitcoin itself? We're going to have these debates. Um, and yeah, I guess I just see incredible relevance in considering the political nature internal to Bitcoin at this point, because we are going to have to, right now, mobilize consensus around an update strategy.
Yeah. But I think about kind of the way that I hear Adam Back and Michael Saylor talk about this, which is that um, there is there's a lot of danger in making rash decisions,
Yes.
especially when it comes to technology that doesn't exist. How can I protect myself against something that doesn't exist? Um, and so, and then there's also the game theory side of it, which is that, well, if I do it too late,
Yeah.
then protecting myself at all. So, um, I yeah, I don't know. It just brings us back to the quantum thing is something that you and I see different sides of. Um, I I view all of the noise around quantum as like the height of mid-twit exchange right now, where the best that quantum can do, I think, is factor the number 15, and it struggles to do that. I don't think it can even do it consistently. Um, and so there is this kind of the sky is falling that's being promoted by a lot of people who are financially benefiting from that promotion. Um, Yet there is always, you can't discount the thing that doesn't exist. And so if it does exist, then it is a threat, um, eventually. But yeah, it is causing a lot of causing a lot of polarization within the Bitcoin community right now. Um, and a lot of people choosing sides and becoming very, I mean, yeah, very, very angsty towards each other when, yeah, level heads will need to prevail if Bitcoin is to be something that
Yeah.
lasts.
So I want to,
Because there, the danger is that we do this hard fork into something that just never materializes, because not because the technology can't make it um, can't make it come true, but because the physics have been misunderstood. Um,
well,
so
So
yeah,
no,
I think
I'd
that's
like to know Lucas's perspective on if there should be some sort of quantum upgrade. For example, BIP 361 proposes a migration to quantum resistant addresses. This is a political discussion within Bitcoin because that they also, as part of BIP 361, then it's a de facto freeze of coins that don't migrate, which are the Satoshi coins and other really old addresses where people might have lost the keys, or maybe they're in a coma and they can't get to their keys in time. So they propose like a 4 or 5 year migration period. So they're saying we got to get this going now, because even if quantum is 5, 10 years in the future, it's such a long process. We want to get going. Technology increases exponentially. So even if the factorization is small now, that just means it's going to increase probably more rapidly than we think when we get things like Mythos and other AI tools that enable us to bootstrap our own technological progress. So I want to know your proposal, but I want to throw out mine. So I think that Bitcoin should coalesce around a proposal where we migrate to quantum, no, where we um, do a freeze where you can still pay out of non-upgraded addresses, but only on a only like you can only do like 4 bitcoins from an address or something like that. So this, which would prevent a dump onto the market, which I don't think actually Bitcoin should be concerned about. It can survive a dump, but also prevents like North Korea from getting 2 million coins or something like that, or some nefarious actor, which would be more dangerous. If so, OG people could still, even if they didn't upgrade, toss out every block, like we could move 5 Bitcoin. And this would just mean that as people, if we do develop quantum computers, they then poach the old coins that aren't accessed, but they do it on a reasonable time frame such that it's not all one nefarious actor all at once. And also we have the, you know, um, it prevents a dump on the market to the extent that that's a threat. So what do you think about BIP grant where we freeze but then allow small transfers? And then what do you think? What would you do? Just no BIP and just say quantum's never going to happen, or what would you do? BIP means Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, and these are the way that they try to get consensus for new upgrades to Bitcoin.
yeah. So I'm thinking about right now. What I'm thinking about, the way that I'm relating this to something in my mind is I can't remember what the guy's name was, but in the 60s, I believe, was the guy that made the prediction that the growth of human population was such that um, it was so fast
Yeah,
that we weren't going to be able to feed everybody, and we're going to kill the planet. We have to slow down and blah blah
right.
blah. And um, the reality is that when societies become more prosperous, they become less progenitive. They make fewer children.
Yeah,
And so what actually happened was that the rate of growth is slowed, and in a lot of cases has now started to reverse. And so now, instead of facing this problem of we're going to have too many people, there are a number of countries that are facing, dire population collapse. And also a lot of the measures that were taken on a political level in order to protect against this thing that did not happen and in retrospect could not happen. Um, a lot of those were way more damaging than like the medicine was far more damaging than the disease.
Hmm.
The proposed cure just quite literally killed millions of people through regulation, through restriction, et cetera, et cetera. And so I guess my and this is another what Mark Andreessen calls underwear. What does he call it? The uh, underwear gnome logic. Something must be done. This is something. Therefore, we must do
Yeah,
this.
that's bad logic.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my take on this is that there is no threat right
Hmm.
now, and making a decision now only has negative consequences. And especially making these arbitrary, it's 4 coins, it's 8 coins, it's 1 coin, it's 30 coins, it's whatever. Um, that doesn't feel good to me.
It's not going to feel
So
good.
I
Yeah.
guess now I would say now is the time to collect more information before acting, because a a move in the wrong direction is more damaging than staying in the same place.
So,
So
so
that's what I would.
2 points on that. You're right about that kind of Malthusian prediction didn't pan out as far as population growth. But what about but that's a social phenomena, and we're looking at technological ones. Consider Moore's law, a company that didn't plan on Moore's prediction about transistors on chips panning out, that company would no longer exist because they would be beat out by the one that incorporated a Moore's law transistor plan into their capital strategy. So that's, technological progress is different than social phenomena. So I would just say I think quantum is more
Yeah, but,
similar to something like Moore's law and less similar to a Malthusian social prediction about population growth.
yeah, but the effects of Moore's law are exponential, and the effect of quantum is just binary, right? So Moore's law is going to slowly degrade your ability to, if you're not complying with what it's telling you, if you are not investing in this thing, if you're not investing in advanced technology, then you're just falling further and further and further and further and further behind. Uh, Quantum is non-existent as a threat now, and if it becomes a threat, it will be a threat. So it's a 0 to 1 thing. It's not a gradual decline. So um, it does become a timing
Yeah,
thing where it's like you do need to act fast when a threat happens. And again, this is another thing that takes us back to game theory. This idea of quantum comes up, then North Korea is going to steal everybody, going to steal Satoshi's coins. If that happens, by the way, Bitcoin becomes immediately not valuable. Like it goes to zero within a matter of days,
I
probably.
wouldn't say zero, but it becomes a
So
lot. It is hit
why, why,
hard
why would you ever, why would you ever use it? Why would you ever use it? Why would anyone ever use it again?
bec- for the same reason they use it now.
No, the reason I use it now is that no one can take it.
Oh,
So
oh yeah,
anyone
yeah.
can
No,
take it.
if quantum realizes,
That's a 0 to 1.
it
So it no
it
longer, it's no longer
it
Bitcoin.
breaks the network if you can quantum poach
Yeah.
coins. Yeah,
That's that is the game theory part of Bitcoin, is that it cannot be stolen, but if it can be stolen, like the fact that it cannot be stolen makes it the most valuable asset in the world
right.
ever. If it can be stolen, it immediately becomes
Right.
worthless. So you go to all this work, you develop all this technology, you spend trillions of dollars, only to steal something worth trillions of dollars that becomes instantly worthless the second you steal it.
So you're saying that a nefarious actor, even if we developed a quantum computer, no one would use it because they would be afraid of making Bitcoin not valuable. That's what you're going to hit.
I'm not saying no one would use it. I'm saying that I'm saying that it certainly wouldn't make
It
sense,
certainly would.
right?
It's certain.
It would be a waste.
No,
It would be the only reason to do it would be like, this is the line that I follow basically, which is that how are you going to have that technology unless you have wealth? And by the time that technology comes around, like, even the best estimates are 5, 10,
yeah.
Adam
Google
back
says 2030.
Adam back 30 years. And
Google
by the
says
way, this
2030.
guy that this is a guy that's like back has studied quantum. He's well versed
I
in this,
doubt that.
right? So what's
I
that?
doubt that he has studied quantum security. He was a
He's
cryptographer.
actually he has actually studied quantum security at a university level. Like, actually, and he even named the professors that he worked with at the University of
So
Montreal.
the
So,
U.S. government,
like,
all these other cryptographers and quantum theorists disagree with him, though. Like, the government is mandating operation by.
are they cryptographers and quantum theorists,
I assume the U.S. government.
or are they people that are not involved in research, that are merely screaming that the
The
sky is
Google
falling?
paper that came out was by people within Google who have advanced knowledge of this. They're not just much more knowledgeable than Adam Back, who's whatever university education he had back in the
But they're not the ones saying it breaks Bitcoin.
in 2030. They said that it could break. There's a new paper, right? The 2030 was the Google deadline, and the U.S. government is mandating its transitions for like certain important systems, I think by 2029. So if you think the U.S. government is basing its movements on nothing, of course they're relying on experts.
I would assign zero logic to anything the U.S. government does. I mean, like,
That's
that,
just a religious
like,
point of view about government at that point.
it
Yeah,
is,
so it's not
but it's a
rational.
religious point of view that's proven out.
It's not rational though.
Um,
To say you're trusting Adam Back over scores of other people just because he's a Bitcoin
over
maxi.
scores of politicians
Not
that are
not no.
incentivized. Yeah,
Politicians base their decisions on recommendations from NIST, National Institute of Standards, and all these other like.
politicians base their
Well,
recommendations on donors.
okay, the politicians didn't make this decision. It's made within bureaucracies based on technical expertise. Look up Project 11. Look up Google paper. These are people who are very knowledgeable. Yes, the predictions differ, but the point is, if a quantum computer can break Bitcoin, someone would either poach coins in a way that is not evident that they're breaking it because they're getting addresses that are not Satoshi addresses, so people don't know, so they have time to dump coins, or you open a massive short position against MSTR, IBIT, FBTC, and then you break it in a very showy way, and you make millions or billions of dollars. Like, you would make so much money if you wanted to break the Bitcoin network, or if the US at that point has doubled down and adopted a huge strategic reserve of Bitcoin. A nefarious actor for sure would want to make a blow against US hegemony by destroying a currency that, if in some future it doubled down on that. So the incentives are there. Someone would use a quantum computer.
What are they gonna make?
Again,
they're gonna make dollars. They're going to make dollars, which are going to be frozen by the U.S. government.
If you can get dollars,
you're gonna break a decentralized system in order to try and win at a centralized system that's being run by somebody else.
You do what North Korea's already doing. Get dollars, convert to USDC, run it through a million different chains. They're doing it right now. I mean, they're already doing this.
Yeah, but like, so again, like, all of those systems will be broken before Bitcoin.
They're not going to, because it's trivially easy for a non-decentralized system to upgrade to quantum secure things.
But again, and we've had this discussion before, though. It's already trivially easy to break all of those systems. It's not trivially
easy, or else the system.
It happens every day.
It doesn't happen globally.
Jason Lowry told us this, right? There is not one single system that the U.S. government has that's not been broken.
But the point, when you break those systems, they can roll back their chains. If someone steals a bunch of money and then they don't like it, if you have a third-party administrator, they can roll back transactions, which Bitcoin can't do. Like, if Bitcoin is broken by quantum, it's broken, whereas a third-party system system, they can
Yeah.
roll back, they can update even after a quantum break and just say, no, we invalidate and seize all these things. But Bitcoin, is different. And so there's not a lot of validity to doing the ostrich thing, sticking your head in the ground, saying, even Adam Back is saying we need to upgrade now. I mean, he's saying that. He's saying we need to upgrade Bitcoin. That's his newest position he's taken after getting enough like flack from other people. He's no longer doing the ostrich posture. Even Saylor says we
But
should upgrade.
it's not head in the sand. It's collecting information. Like this
Okay,
is
so there's two
like
different positions. One is to say no one would ever no one would ever use quantum to break Bitcoin because the incentives are not there. That's head in the sand. That's wrong. To say we should collect more information, that's fine. But what more?
that's what I'm
Okay, so
saying.
then you have to say what
Yeah.
information are you waiting for Adam Back to say? You have one particular person, or are you going to look
I'm waiting for it to be able to factor in to be an actual threat.
if once it's that point?
Like anything close to an actual, because what everyone is saying is that upgrading is
It's
easy.
not easy. Upgrading is
Upgrading is
easy
easy. And
for
by the way,
non-decentralized system. For Bitcoin, it's very
no,
difficult.
no, 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 no. It's the reason it's hard for a decentralized system right now is because there's no threat.
It's so
Because there are people that are polarized that are saying there's people on one side that are screaming and
yes.
yelling and saying this isn't the threat. And then there's other people that are saying it can't consistently factor the number 15. It's not a threat. However, let's say we get to the point where it can factor the number
So
1,000 every
okay,
time
you pick an
perfectly.
arbitrary
At
point.
that point, then you've probably got people that are in agreement. Like if there's evidence, you're going to see that shift of people that currently oppose. But like the idea, like forcing through something when there is not consensus is not a good
Well,
idea.
nobody's forcing. They're proposing protocols, and we're debating it. And I'm saying we should do it now, based on, for example, the Google paper and other people. Because if you do take a proposal and put it into action, where we have to move keys to certain secure addresses, that migration will take a lot of time because there's a limited amount of block space to move the coins, and so you have to factor in a huge amount of lead time. And if it does involve seizing de facto coins, you have to give people enough time to where they have time to do it. So starting 5 years out is necessary. And given some of the
It's not. It's not. It's not necessary. Like if there is a threat, then people will act. The reason we need 5 years is that it's not a threat.
you can't.
Like, but if it was, hey, by the way, if you don't move your coins in the next 30 days, they're going to be burned. People would
No,
do that.
they
It
wouldn't
would
be able
happen.
to,
Like
because
that
there's
news
not
will
enough block
travel.
space to get all the transactions through at that point. You have to move, you have to begin the migration with sufficient time. Transactions are going to cost like $40,000. Everybody's trying to get on, rushing to get on in 30 days. You can't, 30 days is not enough lead time to do all the transactions to move to quantum safe addresses.
Okay. I guess if I zoom back out and I look at this conversation, or I look at this online debate, there is one side that's calling the other side idiots, and there's another side that's
You're
saying
mischaracterizing the debate.
maybe not right
You,
now. I'm not you,
okay, I'm part of it though. I'm part of it, and I'm saying we need to rationally act
but
now.
like your flag bearer, Nick Carter,
Oh, you
is
just
like consistently calling people idiots here.
and so that invalidates
And
Project 11 and Google and NIST and everybody else who's saying it.
what I'm saying is that when you look at other arguments, typically the side that's calling one, like almost always, the side that's calling the other side idiots is the side that is making
If you
irrational
don't think
judgments.
that, what about people calling quantum people fudsters and like saying that quantum can't happen and stuff like that, giving specious arguments? Like, I don't trust that side either.
There's a difference between calling them fudsters and saying it can't happen. I am calling them fudsters. I'm not saying it can't
Well, you
happen.
said that earlier based on Nick and Jake's theories about quantum, that it's physically impossible.
No, I didn't. What I said was if I said, look, just consider, because there's one side that's saying we will not even consider this idea. Like we won't even consider the idea that quantum string theory, which has existed for 90, 100 years and has never evolved beyond being a theory and has prominent people, Stephen Wolfram, Eric Weinstein, prominent physicists who say that this is bullshit. It is not going anywhere. They are being silenced. They will not be heard. Like the other side won't even listen to the idea that this is not a viable thing. That's not science. Science is We consider everything. And one of those possible outcomes is that this is not a threat. And by the way, the Nick and Jake thing is that, look, here is a example of evidence that we have. On the other side, there is no example of evidence. There's theory, but there's no example of evidence. And so if you were to make a decision and you were to say, look, I'm going to walk down a path. On one side, there's a tiger. On the other side, there's a story about a tiger. Which one should I avoid? I should avoid the tiger, and I'll take my chances with the story of the tiger. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we're going to agree to disagree on this one because assigning a percentage possibility to the development of quantum computers that is non-zero means that you need to act. I think that's
Not saying it's, again, I'm not saying it's non-zero. I'm saying now is not the proper time to act.
and
Now is like online outrage, rage baiting, people calling people idiots.
I'm sorry your feelings
There
were
is
hurt.
no, there's no threat.
Exactly.
There
And you
is,
have
there is
to,
literally no
and
threat
once there
right
is a
now.
threat, it's too late. That's the only point I'd make. So we can,
But it doesn't become 0 to 1. Like it's first, it has to consistently factor the number
okay.
15.
So if you give some,
It doesn't go from that to breaking
I
elliptical
agree. And
curve.
so that's why I look at, again, things like NIST, things like Project 11. I mean, I have like people who are predicting things based on their knowledge. That's what I'm basing it on. And it takes, again, an amount of time to do a migration. So we have to have some, we agree, I think. And initially, there needs to be a migration. We need to assess the threat sufficiently far in advance. And we're at a disagreement about if we've arrived at the point where now's the time. So that's an honest disagreement for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, that's the only thing we're disagreeing about
yeah.
is like, is now the time? I don't think now is the time to
Yeah.
act. I think now people are acting rashly.
Yeah. I hope to convince you, but whether we convince you or not, we're going to drag you along on our fork. So,
Both in on Bitcoin.
yeah,
If they upgrade, I
right.
upgrade.
And a
But
hard fork's not bad.
yeah,
Well, we get 2 chains then, from my understanding. I wasn't here for the last one, but I'll take a multiple chains of coins. I don't care. One of them will filter out as the winner.
I don't think that's good. I don't think that's
Not good.
great. Bitcoin Cash is,
No, but I
oh,
mean, if you have Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, like I'll take them both. It doesn't matter. So,
I mean, one of them's like worth something and the other's
exactly. And you
not.
can let the market decide. I'll hold both of them and let whatever hard fork happens, you just hold your coins and then let the market decide. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I mentioned this earlier that that Land was saying that autonomous capital has its own will to power. That will to power is this desire we all have to increase our own capacity. It's an idea that comes from Nietzsche. But what does that mean for a decentralized system? Like that's a very different thing because the centralized system is not an agent. It has no will, right? Um, and so it's kind of interesting the way that he talks about this will in relation to something like autonomous capital, something like Bitcoin. When something acts to survive, it expresses a will to power, and we tend to reduce the acting part of it to what we perceive as the willing part of it, as the agentic part. For humans, take this as an example. We're a system. We're systems of autonomous processes. Our heart, our pheromones, our hormones, our breathing, some partially under our control, some in no way. And yet when a human acts, we don't say that they did it because of the beat of their heart or their spleen or something, except for in a metaphorical sense. We say they did it because of their ego or their sense of self. So we tend to reduce all of the human system to the central nervous system and then ascribe all action to that, the generation of an ego by the central nervous system. But that part is only a part of a system. A human is a system. Social systems are also the same way. When a nation acts, we ascribe it to the government, to the president, even though it's this huge complex system. We instead take one representation of the system and say that that system is the actor. The point then is that the ego, the self, the president is an imperfect translation or reduction of what the agent actually is. The multiplicities within any system, including an organism, are also constituents and not just the ego. And there can be a misalignment between the agent, the acting part explicitly, and the rest of the organism. An ego can kill itself through suicide, which is counterproductive to the rest of the system, or an ego can act to preserve itself and save face to preserve its sense of selfhood instead of even when it does things that are harmful to the overall system. How does that relate to Bitcoin? For Bitcoin, an explicitly decentralized system, there is a will to power, Land says, this will to increase its own capacity that is expressed through a movement towards a telos or an end goal, but without the mask of the agent claiming to speak for the entire structure. That's the debate we were just having for the past 10 minutes. No one of us can dictate the path that Bitcoin will take through an upgrade. Instead, it's this complex system. The structure merely reproduces itself, and in doing that, like a snowball rolling uphill, it increases its own capacity to become what it needs to become. And we kind of mentioned that earlier. I thought that was interesting, so I wanted to throw it out. I don't know if it adds anything.
Yeah, nothing from me on
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Or
it just lands.
lands. Yeah,
It look land.
I caught the pun right away, man. Chapter 5 then, cash machines. We again get here the story of money. The story of money is we've been told it a ton of ways in this podcast, right? It can be anthropological through Graeber, Smolinski, or Nick Szabo. It can be economic through the Austrians or the other schools. I forget what we can call them, the the
Made
made
up
up
ones.
ones. Yeah. It can be technological. Alden tells a technological story of the development of money and broken money. It can be political. We have a cypherpunk rendering of the development of money. Here it's philosophical. Again, we got a transcendental deduction of money through Kantian critique, asking about the conditions under which something legitimately produces objects and aiming to establish those limits. Um, and so the philosophy of money then is about trying to show what are the conditions or requirements for money itself by looking, so we kind of look at what is necessary that money be in order to carry out an activity that is already happening, like commerce. So commerce is already happening, so we can define money in relation to the things that are already happening with it. And given that we already have certain commercial activities, what do they require of money? What do they presuppose that money be? And Land says money is necessary for or presupposed by commercial calculation. Money needs to have characteristics that allow for the generation of prices through discovery spontaneously in a market. Prices that are then abstracted such that $100 can buy $100 worth of shoes, $100 worth of curtains, $100 worth of cars, whatever. They're all abstracted in number. So money is required for prices and therefore the creation of commercial objects, which are those things we denominate through prices. And kind of by walking backwards from we already have commerce, commerce requires money. What does money do? We can begin to get the necessary structural characteristics of money, which is a common Nick Land ends up where we began in a lot of conversations: durability, scarcity, divisibility, communicability, portability, verifiability. There's an anthropological way to arrive at these. Historically, we've kind of coordinated on gold or valuables, collectibles rather. There's also a philosophical way, which is to walk back from commerce, what we have, to explain what is needed to create it as a precondition, and we get the same answer: durability, scarcity, divisibility, verifiability, etc. So I just thought that was an interesting point. But the really interesting point that Land makes, and this is kind of hinted at earlier, there is a telos to money. There is something that money is becoming that it is not yet. So we can consider what money is by considering what better money would be, and then projecting backward from that ideal or that goal to see what money is becoming and to learn more about money, which is a very Landian point. Again, it's to look to the future, to say there's something coming at us from the future, which is pulling us towards it, which is what money can in its best ideal instantiation be. And then we can understand what money is now and where it's going, which, we get to Bitcoin through that route for sure. So,
Yeah, all roads lead back. And it is to the inner. I've had this like thought in my mind that um, we because we have fiat money, we have iteration, which is incremental improvements in things. And the reason being is that um, we have to keep moving forward. We have to keep moving forward because every day your money is becoming worth
Yeah.
less if it's in fiat. But with truly hard money, with Bitcoin, then I think we focus more on innovation than iteration, which
Right.
innovation is a separate way of doing
Yes.
things that instead of doing it 10% better, typically, like I the kind of like the hallmark of being able to recognize an innovation is that it's basically like an order of magnitude, right? It does the thing 10 times better, 10 times faster, 10 times safer, 10 times easier. You think about like going from a horse to a car. That was the innovation. The iteration was the better horse, which is what Henry Ford said everybody wanted. But the car was 10 times faster. It was 10 times safer. It was 10 times easier to operate. It takes a while to learn how to ride a horse. It takes 15 minutes to learn how to drive a car. You might crash. Yeah. And granted,
Yeah.
there's there's consequences, of course. There's always consequences. But the hallmarks of being able to recognize an innovation in terms of being able to see it as a order of magnitude increase. And then also there's the nice little hallmark of the criminal element is usually the one that adopts it first. Um, this is where we get innovation. Well, Bitcoin was the innovation, but it's also, I believe, the innovation that inspires other innovation because instead of merely iterating upon things and throwing money at, you know, throwing money you think about like the traditional venture capital model, which is like, we're going to invest in 100 companies and 95 of them are going to fail and three of them are going to break even and one's going to make a little money and one's going to make a lot of money. Um, that works now. But then you look at like, what do Bitcoin venture firms look like? The like Ego Death Capital of the world and, um, Ryan Gentry's, Acquisition Corp. They're a lot different. They're a lot more careful with the capital they hand out because it's Bitcoin and you can't just magically make more of it like you can with
Yeah.
dollars. Can't just print it out. So yeah, it changes. It's the innovation that inspires innovation,
Nice.
I
Yeah.
think. And that has orders of magnitude benefit for
Yeah,
humanity.
even just once you conceive of money as technology, innovation becomes possible, and you don't look at the current version of it as like this is the thing. Even Bitcoin, we know is going to develop more, even the ways that we use it, and so innovation is that path into the future that leads toward the ideal goal, the telos of something. So I like that use. That's nice. Um, so land. There's a couple interesting points here I want to weave together and throw at you. So philosophy is about thinking, right? Broadly speaking, we could say. Money also has an interesting linkage to thought itself, Land says. I mean, we've already said that money is used to generate prices. So it's a form of information aggregation and generation of a new thing, a price. Um, so, if we take a very broad view of commercial calculation, we can say that money is even necessary for thinking itself, in that when we think, we determine, we economize, we choose between courses of actions based on benefits and costs, and we tend to allocate those benefits and costs based on money, right? Based on the opportunity cost of the thing lost or the units of value we expect to get. To quote Land, money is the ontological correlate of commercial calculation. Without it, there could not be pricing. It is a thing that supports or even actually induces thought within a domain whose limits are not readily fixed. So there's some sense in which money actually has a linkage to thought. And we can see that, I think, non ridiculously in the way that people who are good with money maybe tend to predict the future better and think more clearly because they see the skin in the game in every decision that they make. They see the costs and the benefits and they judge accordingly. Once you can price things, you can begin to choose between different options by ascribing probability and price risk to those things. Money also leads to abstract thought. So not just that kind of gave us this form of calculative quantitative thought, but Land says there's also a way in which money itself leads to abstract thought. There's a particular time in history when, within history, for material reasons, not divine, not Prometheus stealing fire, we get money. We get a certain new type of thinking. Monetary practices require abstract thinking because 11 grams of barley becomes 1 shekel, and then 1 shekel can be translated in terms of cattle, in terms of other things that are not barley. We begin to abstract everything into numbers. So this requires an ability to think abstractly, which is maybe not natively human, but is induced by the way that money abstracts things into number, into price. And I mean, just at the most general level, money is conceived of as sort of like pure value, which is values in itself kind of an abstraction. And so once you begin to navigate and use money, you move into a realm of abstract thinking where things are not themselves, but instead represent the value that they have in terms of a standard of account, a unit. Um, so for Land, then, tying all this together, money is a form of intelligence. Its thinking is the generation of prices for all things, and this thinking produces a resulting spontaneous order as capital allocates according to those prices. Um, Again, we can't know in the future what money is even going to be, and we see it growing towards intelligence. The separation then between crypto and AI is much less than we would think. Money seems to be trending towards intelligence, and maybe there's a point in the future where they simply become the same thing, like compute or something. What do you think about that?
Think that value is groupthink. So when things have value, it's because lots of people think they have
Yeah,
value. Uh, and so this is the thought that creates the price.
yeah.
Um, and where you see people that are performing what we would call abstract thought, they are discovering the group thought before the group does, and positioning themselves to benefit. So abstract thinking is really just group think that the group hasn't yet thought of. They
Yeah.
are, you know, like it's the transistors thing, right? Or the discussion there. It's like, yeah, it's only considered abstract thought because other people aren't having that thought. It's not abstract when everybody else has the thought. Like the idea that computers are going to change the world is an abstract thought in 1920. In 2020, it's what everybody thinks. It's what everybody knows. And so, yeah, this ability to find value is simply the ability to, um, we can call it abstract thought, but what is abstract thought? It's just the precursor to what everybody knows. Um, yeah. So I guess to me, that's the relationship
And
between money
yeah,
and
and Land,
thinking.
one of the things you said there, Land agreed with too in this text. I don't know if I have a quote from it, but he does think that money is defined essentially by what's acceptable as money. Seems circular, but it's essentially market participation
Yeah.
tokens, and certain characteristics lead to the acceptance kind of by consensus of certain things as money. But the fact that they are transferable, that we all accept them is in the end what makes them money. Um, yeah, let me see if I we got we're getting towards the end here. And let me just see if I have anything that we haven't already. We kind of moved about and sprawled about. Um, one of the things that we touched upon, this is like towards the end, he doesn't finish chapter 6, but he calls it the open secret, and it's just not fully written. But in the introduction, he kind of talks about what it is going to be about. and it's the age of the open secret, and it is this idea that I alluded to at the very beginning, about cryptography allowing for the age of the open secret or of the mask with public facing identities, but that yet are concealed, which is what, having the public blockchain, but having restricted access based on private public key, that type of dynamic. That can, I think what Land is getting at here is we're going to get into, and we're moving into this already again with with the notion, the famous New Yorker comic, on the internet, nobody can tell if you're a dog or whatever, something like that. We already have digital avatars that represent our ego, that are the bearers of our ego instead of the physical body, which is what they were in the past, which stably pegged an identity to one entity, the physical person. Now there can be multiple representations of your identity online, and you can be somebody on Twitter versus somebody else on Facebook and somebody else altogether on all your shit posting alts that you maintain to screw up the quantum debate or whatever you're doing. So Bitcoin is then just a big iteration of this because it allows a money for the people that wear masks online, I guess.
Quantum posting. That's the last thing you said.
I want those to be inscribed in on my tombstone. Quantum shit posting. That's the place where we're all at in the community. So I think that's a fine epitaph. Um, we
I think it's fitting that you were struck down the second you mentioned that.
That's right. There's a higher power that's trying to prevent me from screwing things up. Um,
Also, God, much more easily explained with discrete time.
oh. You sound like, I don't know, man. You sound like a pre-Kantian philosopher trying to describe everything in terms of God. But actually, Kant also tied it all back to God too. Like they just philosophers can't resist. They're like, gotta have God on their side, which is, I guess, not the worst player in the game.
Yeah, and who knows? It might be true.
No, and yeah, it's definitely true. I mean,
So,
unquestionably, undoubtedly, there's no quantum argument for or against. But I mean, that's the end of it, man. We
anyways, yeah. Sorry.
chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8. These are all unfinished, and they, in their unfinishedness, they really don't add much to the concepts we've already got out, except to say that if you're if you're a Bitcoin influencer and what you're going to talk about tomorrow is price action, or what you're going to talk about the day after that is price action, or what you're going to talk about the day after that is quantum FUD and the opposite of quantum FUD, and then go back to price action, look at Land, take one of his ideas and just run with it, because there's a lot of great ideas in here that just need to, that I think could enliven the thinking of the community. I don't know. I mean, you did a great job of helping me to like bring these concepts down to earth and stuff. They're difficult concepts, but I really do think Land adds something to Bitcoin discourse. This is from 2018. He's writing this. And it's just so deeply thought. And I hope that I did a good enough job. And I hope that our conversation made it intelligible and enticing so that people really do go, who is this Land feller and what is cryptocurrent and what can I learn from it?
Yeah, I'll echo that. Since you introduced me to Zeno systems, I have become a just a big fan of the way that Nick Land thinks, because he takes things to the limit. That was the defining thing about Zeno systems was, okay, if we have digital super intelligence and we have robots that can do everything, and then when we have digital money, where does that go? And that goes to a place where you have a closed loop of autonomous capital. And what does that look like? Well, we don't know, because we aren't going to be involved. It's a separate system. And this actually, I know that you had talked about cryptocurrency as being like an even more dense read than Zeno systems, and in ways,
Very much
yes,
so. Yeah.
very much, right? Um, Yet the ideas are, again, like that's the way to recognize brilliant ideas, is that when they are explained, they land, and it makes sense. So I am looking forward to other people going down the same path that we did, which is discovering Nick Land, thinking in a different way, that abstract thought, which is merely groupthink before the group thinks it. Um, I'm looking forward to that because you're right. Um, it raises the level of discourse. It takes us beyond price action. It takes us beyond shouting from the rooftops about um, improvement protocols and core and knots and all this other stuff. And um, not that this stuff can't go wrong,
Yeah.
but these things have a way of working themselves out
Right.
when the evidence is evident
Yep.
to everyone. And that's the thing is like it's just like Bitcoin, right? It's not immediately evident what it is. And um, the more that you learn about it, the more it becomes evident. Oh, this is the thing that replaces all these other things. This is the next evolution of money. This is the power projection weapon in cyberspace. This is a lot of things that are not evident when you first look at it, even though there's somebody screaming at you, this is what it is. This is what it is. This
Yeah.
is what it is. And you're just like, I'm not quite sure. And so we all need to see more of that evidence in order to get there. So, Nick Land is one of the guys, one of the few people that is going to be able to inspire that type of thought. And so, um, any investment that you put towards understanding Nick Land, especially if you really do invest in trying to understand it, which is like when I read Xenosystems, a lot of what I was doing was reading it, not understanding it, copying and pasting it into Grok and saying, please explain this, then copying and pasting it into ChatGPT, seeing same thing, seeing what the differences are. Um, Try to understand not just how I think, but how, break this down, explain like I'm 12, explain like I'm 8, explain like I'm 12 again.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a big benefit here. Nick Land heightens the level of Bitcoin discourse, and I look forward to seeing him become a greater part of the discussion and being able to elevate the ideas that he has into a more globalized conversation.
Because if he doesn't, it's just going to be Lucas and I here,
Just me
and
and you
man, we could raise the
shouting at each
discourse.
other.
We could raise the discourse a bit if we had some philosophers out here. So, but no, man, it was a fun conversation. I like being able to have these conversations with you because, however heated they get, I mean, you're making good points, and it refines my thinking to hear how you're articulating your points, and so it's all in good fun and good spirited, and I love it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And like say the one thing that I have learned about Bitcoin, and this has been a problem in other areas because it makes me less sure because understanding Bitcoin is like um the thing that I know to be most true is that Bitcoin is real and that it's taking over it's changing the world. But what that did, recognizing that high truth, was that it brought into question all these other truths, right? It brought into question the incentives and the motivation of my government, of politicians, of people around me. And so there is, while it itself is grounding, it can also be unsettling in other areas. So, um, the value of conversations like this is that they are regrounding in those other areas from which I may have become temporarily unmoored and aimless, drifting. So yeah,
yeah,
there's huge value here.
that's a great statement on what philosophy can be in its best iteration. So, thanks everybody for sticking around, and I look forward to the next thing we're going to discuss.
We carry on later.